Segment 1. Foundational Paradoxes of a Godless World. The First Cause Paradox. Imagine tracing the chain of causes for everything you see. In ordinary life, every effect has a cause, and it's natural to ask, if the universe exists, what caused it? In philosophy, this is known as the first cause paradox. Can something truly arise from nothing? If one insists on a cause for every effect, then the universe must have a cause. But what could precede time and space? Here we meet a crossroads. If the universe itself is the first cause, then one must explain how it comes to be without anything before it. On the other hand, if we posit a creator as the ultimate cause, then skeptics may ask, what caused the creator? This leads to its own circularity. The paradox is that every explanation seems to demand a prior explanation, and so on, ad infinitum. Philosophers have long noted that nothingness seems to yield nothing. Thomas Aquinas and others pointed out that to claim matter or the cosmos arose from literal nothing is puzzling. In effect, the first cause paradox highlights a deep tension. If our world required a cause, then if God is that cause, one might ask who caused God. But if there is no God, then what explains the very first cause of the universe? Some modern scientists have ventured an answer. Physicist Lawrence Krauss, for example, provocatively argued that quantum physics can make something arise out of what we think of as nothing. He wrote that not only can something arise from nothing, something will always arise from nothing. But this idea invites even more questions. What does nothing mean? If empty quantum fields are still something, have we really escaped a first cause? And even if the laws of physics allow fluctuations that spark universes, the laws themselves seem to presuppose some reality. In other words, invoking physics to create something from nothing only pushes the question one layer back. Even in Krauss's picture, the something of quantum fields, or the multiverse, has to exist without explanation, which simply makes the first cause problem more subtle rather than solving it. Ultimately, the first cause paradox reminds us of a choice between two hard positions. Either the chain of existence loops back without end, or there is a reality outside of the material cosmos that grounds that chain. Both options strain our intuitions. An endless causal loop or an infinite regress raises difficulties of its own, as we will see next, and a transcendent first cause, a creator, raises the question of its own origin. Perhaps it's because the creator exists outside of time and space, while we are bound by them. As humans, we rely on sequence and causation. We always need something to come from something. That's our frame of reference. When we look around, almost everything we encounter, buildings, technology, even art, has a clear human origin. We naturally assume a mind was behind it. But then we turn to the ocean, to mountains, to the rhythm of seasons and the beauty of wildlife. And those things simply are. They just exist. And here lies the irony. We instinctively know man-made things must have a maker, but we often look at the natural world, far more intricate, vast, and complex, and believe it just happened. In quiet reflection, even apart from theology, the ancient question arises again. Why is there something rather than nothing? That question itself hints at a reality deeper than materialism alone can answer. The puzzle of the first cause encourages gentle wonder about whether the cosmos might have a deeper source, or whether our understanding of nothing is incomplete. The infinite regress problem. closely related is the infinite regress problem. If every cause has a prior cause, and so on forever backward in time, we face an infinite series of causes stretching into the past. But can an infinite past actually work? Imagine trying to count up from negative infinity to today. It's impossible. You could never reach the present because there's an endless road behind you. In the words of one analogy, picture a line of soldiers giving permission for a gun to fire. If there's no first soldier in line, no one ever gets permission. In the same way, if there were no initial event at the dawn of time, then nothing could ever arrive at now. Many thinkers have noted that a completed infinite regress of events seems practically incoherent. If an endless sequence of steps were required to reach the present, we'd never get here. Renowned mathematician David Hilbert famously remarked on infinity's role in reality. The infinite is nowhere to be found in reality. The infinite is solely that of an idea. In a purely physical universe, actual infinity, an infinite past, looks more like a conceptual tool than something real. If time had no beginning, we would have traversed an infinite series of moments to get here. Hilbert's insight cautions us that we use mathematical infinity in theory, but in the real cosmos, it seems absent. This supports the notion that the chain of events likely had some starting point. Yet if one insists on an infinite regress, one still runs into paradoxes. For example, one might argue the universe simply always existed, but that view leads to puzzling implications. If the universe is past eternal, what about the growth of entropy, the heat-death of an eternal cosmos? In fact, modern cosmology, the Big Bang theory and related theorems, suggests time itself started, which intuitively aligns with the philosophical worry that a never-ending past is hard to make sense of. In any case, refusing to posit a beginning forces us into a bewildering scenario where there is no first cause at all. Yet then we still have no explanation for the existence of the endless chain itself. Put simply, the infinite regress problem tells us that in a godless framework, every attempt to avoid a first cause merely compounds the difficulty. If we remove God as an explanation, we either commit to an uncomfortable infinite regress, a chain of causes stretching backward forever, or we accept a universe that somehow exists without any grounding. Neither option is satisfying. Either we deny our intuitive sense that things must begin somewhere, or we accept unexplained mystery as a brute fact. In the quiet of thought, one can feel the tension. We know things begin, yet we also fear origins that can't be explained. Those who reject the idea of a higher power might assume humans already know enough, or will eventually know enough, to stop questioning entirely. Others, more unsure, leave the question open, and in doing so, they acknowledge something quietly profound. We don't know everything, and maybe we're not meant to. That humility, that pause, allows room for deeper exploration. And perhaps this very paradox is gently nudging us to wonder whether something, or someone, exists outside the chain of causes, anchoring it all. The fine-tuning argument. Another puzzle arises when we examine how exquisitely our universe is calibrated. Physicists have long marveled at what is called the fine-tuning of physical constants. Quantities like the strength of gravity, the mass of the electron, and the cosmological constant appear to have very specific values, such that if any were even slightly different, life, as we know it, would not be possible. Stephen Hawking put it clearly. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. In other words, our universe's laws seem delicately set to allow stars, planets, chemistry, and ultimately biology. Why is this surprising? If there were no designer, one might still imagine a giant multiverse where all possible combinations of constants exist, and we just happen to be in one with the right values. But even that hypothesis has its issues. The odds of randomly hitting the narrow life-permitting range are so low that many philosophers find it counterintuitive. It's akin to throwing darts at random and hitting a tiny bullseye. Possible, but incredibly lucky without a guiding hand. Some see this as a pointer to design. As one source notes, the very beauty and order we find in nature, the elegance of physics and math, lead various observers to argue that experiencing beauty itself is evidence of a creator. Indeed, if things naturally ran on completely blind chance, why would the universe so tightly cradle life? Of course, not everyone accepts that design is the only explanation. Some scientists suggest the multiverse or anthropic principles could account for fine-tuning without God. Still, even discussing that leads back to a kind of unexplained something, either numerous unseen universes or the deep reason why the laws themselves exist. In any case, the fine-tuning paradox invites wonder. It gently reminds us that the conditions for our existence are special, hinting perhaps that there is more than random chaos in the cosmos. For an agnostic listener, this might feel like gazing up at stars and feeling a spark of awe. The cosmos is here, life is here, and the numbers line up in an uncanny way. Even without insisting on God, one can quietly ask, why do the cosmic dials appear so finely set? The Contingency Paradox. Why does anything exist at all? It's a question as old as thought. Most things in our experience, from people to planets, from cells to galaxies, are contingent. That is, they exist, but they don't have to. They could have failed to exist. You, for example, might never have been born. The same could be said of a mountain range, a continent, a star. All of it. Optional, dependent, conditional. Now step back and apply this idea to everything. If all of existence is made up of things that don't have to exist, things that are dependent on something else, we reach a strange conclusion. Everything is leaning on something else. Everything is balanced on some prior condition. But what happens when you follow that back far enough? At some point, you must ask, is there anything that isn't contingent? Anything that simply is? This is what philosophers call the Contingency Paradox. If every part of the universe is contingent, if it could just as easily not be, then what keeps the whole system from slipping into nothingness? Why is there something rather than nothing? The paradox is this: contingency demands explanation. But if everything is contingent, no full explanation can be given. It's like trying to build a house out of cards suspended in the air and never placing anything solid at the base. The whole structure collapses unless some part of reality is non-contingent, necessary, eternal, self-existent. But what does that mean in a godless world? Materialism, the belief that only matter exists, struggles here. Matter, energy, time, all of these could, in principle, not exist. They are particular realities, not logically necessary ones. There is no physical reason that demands this universe had to be real. And yet, here it is, contingent but present, Some atheists or agnostics respond by calling the universe a brute fact. It just exists. No reason, no cause, no explanation. That's where the road ends. But this feels, to many, deeply unsatisfying, not just emotionally, but logically. If everything in our experience cries out for explanation, and if we never accept it just is in any other area of life, then why accept it for everything? The Christian thinker Thomas Aquinas phrased it clearly. That which does not have the reason for its existence in itself must be brought into existence by something else. If we take that seriously, then the only way to avoid an infinite regress of contingency is to arrive at a necessary being, one that contains the reason for its existence within itself, not dependent, not optional, just being. Some call this being God. Some just say the universe. Others leave it unnamed. But either way, something non-contingent must exist, or else nothing would. One might object, but why couldn't the universe be necessary? A fair question. But then we have to ask, what is it about this specific universe, with its fine-tuned constants, entropy, matter, and laws, that makes it logically necessary? Is there anything about the Higgs boson, or gravity, or electrons, that requires their existence in every possible world? Not really. They're all particular features, complex, measurable, mutable, necessary things, in the strict philosophical sense, are simple, unchanging, and metaphysically necessary. Things like numbers, logic, or perhaps God. Then God doesn't depend on anything else. He is, as the classical tradition puts it, a sea from himself, the uncaused cause, the necessary ground of all contingent being. And if God didn't exist, then we are left with contingency all the way down. Every aspect of reality, optional, possible, fragile. And yet it persists. Why? This is where the paradox becomes quietly profound. You, lying there in bed, your heart beating, your mind drifting, are a contingent being in a contingent universe. And yet you are here, existing, thinking, wondering. Can contingency explain itself? In a godless framework, we are told, yes, somehow, randomness arranged itself into something, and that something became everything. No reason, just chance. But the moment you feel the ache for an answer, the desire to know why, you have stepped outside of materialism's bounds. You've whispered the ancient question that every child and every philosopher has asked. Why anything at all? That whisper doesn't prove God. It doesn't force faith. But it does suggest that our minds and hearts are tuned to something deeper than mere atoms. We are wired to seek grounding, to find the base of the stack, to ask what holds everything else. There seems to be something, or someone, who simply is, because everything else is leaning, and something must be holding it all up. And the very way we are wired to seek grounding and meaning suggests we were made to search, not just for truth, but for the source behind it. The Temporal Paradox. If time began, what was before? And if it never began, how are we here? When we consider time itself as having a starting point, it challenges our deepest intuitions. We naturally expect before every event. But if time had a beginning, perhaps at the moment of the Big Bang, there was simply no time before it. That suggests time emerged from something timeless. Is that even coherent? Or if instead time stretches backward forever, with no beginning, we face the opposite puzzle. How could the present ever arrive? An infinite past seems like an unending road. How could we finish counting down from infinitely many moments just to reach now? Philosopher J. M. E. McTaggart argued that our ordinary idea of time, what he called the A series, where events flow from future to present to past, is logically contradictory and ultimately an illusion. That leaves the B series, where events are just ordered points in time without flowing. But then why does time feel like it's moving? Why is now so significant to us? Physicists also wrestle with this. Some suggest time might be emergent, a phenomenon arising from deeper rules like entropy and thermodynamics, not fundamental itself. That hints that time and its passage are properties of how matter behaves, not something that exists apart from the universe. Yet this perspective doesn't fully resolve the paradox. If time is emergent, how does an emergent property produce the first moment? It implies the universe behaves as if it had time before time existed. If there is no prior time, talking about a beginning of time becomes meaningless, leaving us with a mysterious boundary where physics breaks down. Materialists sometimes point to quantum cosmology, where time may emerge from a timeless wave function. But this still begs the question of why that wave function exists and what explains its rules. What accounts for the boundary condition that gave birth to our universe? In a godless framework, time is either impossibly infinite or starts mysteriously. Neither feels satisfying. The quiet tension remains. Time seems real, flowing, and directional, even as we sense its origins elude understanding. The Lawgiver Paradox. If natural laws govern the universe with precision, who or what established them? Everywhere we look, planets orbit, light travels, seasons change, we see consistent patterns following rules. These laws of nature appear universal, mathematical, stable. Gravity doesn't occasionally decide to pull upward. Electrons don't randomly ignore electric fields. They obey the same laws every time, everywhere. But why? If our universe is purely the product of blind physical processes with no transcendent mind, why would it follow precise, discoverable laws at all? Theologian David Coppage put it clearly. Why should nature be law-like at all? The only warrant for laws of nature that are truly out there is belief in a personal, rational, consistent God. Without placing the laws in the mind of a rational designer, they seem inexplicable. They could just as easily have been chaotic or inconsistent, but they're not. Philosopher C.S. Lewis noted that science itself, the belief in discoverable laws, only makes sense if law-like order exists. To do science requires believing that patterns won't suddenly change. But if everything is just chance, why trust consistency? Atheists sometimes respond with nominalism. The laws are just descriptions of observed regularities, patterns we impose. But that approach fails to account for the normative power of laws, why they compel, predict, and undergird technology, not merely describe. Others point to the multiverse. Perhaps all possible laws exist, and ours is where coherent laws emerged. But this pushes the question deeper. Who or what actualizes that multiverse? And why those laws rather than others? In a godless world view, then, where do stable universal laws come from? Do they exist inherently in matter? Are they raw facts, unexplained? Are they human constructs approximating patterns? None of these fully accounts for the authority and reliability we experience when, say, launching a rocket or measuring time. So the paradox stands: we operate as if laws are absolute, yet their origin remains hidden unless one allows that fundamental order has an ordering mind behind it. The something from Probabilities Paradox. Can mathematical probabilities produce reality without a framework in which to act? Probability underpins much of modern science: quantum mechanics, statistics, evolutionary theory. Yet probability is not itself an object. It's a framework, a way of calculating likelihoods. It is script, not actor. So the question follows: if the universe began with a quantum fluctuation or emerged by chance, can probability alone create something? Or does probability presuppose a deeper framework? Probability theory, as one philosopher explained, is meaningless unless we provide an interpretation of its axioms and theorems. That is, probability only works because we assign structure, outcomes, events, ensembles. In quantum mechanics, interpretations like cubism highlight that probabilities aren't objective physical tendencies, but subjective beliefs about measurement. In other words, quantum probabilities describe our expectations, not something physically generating reality. So if reality emerged from probability, we still must ask, probability of what? Probability by itself is inert. It requires a base reality to apply to. Consider the idea that we live in a lottery of quantum outcomes. Without a framework, states, outcomes, observers, your probability calculations are abstract. They don't cause anything. They don't bring particles or atoms into existence. This raises a deeper paradox. In a godless worldview where matter and energy simply fluctuate, what gives probabilities their power? What transforms them into reality? Some suggest that once the universe exists, probabilities shape its evolution. But that still leaves unexplained the birth of the framework into which probability can operate. Space, time, physical constants, quantum fields, all there from the start. You might then say, fine, probability emerges together with these structures. But again, why would random potentialities form coherent structures with lawful behavior? You are left with yet another layer of unexplained emergence. Thus the paradox. Probability needs structure to act. Structure needs explanation. Without a mind or foundational reality, probability cannot generate anything. You can't create matter from nothing by rolling dice. Rolling dice presupposes something. The Cosmic Permission Paradox. If existence has no source, where did the permission to be come from? If the universe wasn't called into being, how did it get the right to exist at all? In a godless worldview, it's often assumed that the universe just is. No cause, no design, no intentionality. It simply exists as a brute fact. But this posture carries a hidden assumption, often overlooked in quiet reflection. The assumption that being itself needs no permission, that something can just spring into existence or continue existing without asking anything from anyone. This brings us to the Cosmic Permission Paradox. If there is no transcendent source or authority, nothing above or beyond existence, then who or what allowed reality to be? And this is not to say allowed in a legalistic sense. It is to ask, what granted the conditions or capacity for being to occur at all? Consider this. In our day-to-day world, nothing simply asserts itself into being without something behind it. A house doesn't just exist, it's built. A tree grows from a seed. A thought arises from a mind. In every case, existence seems to rely on something deeper to bring it forth or to sustain it. But if the universe is all there is, with no deeper reality beneath it, then we are forced to believe that being itself simply gave itself permission. But here's the paradox. How can something that doesn't yet exist grant itself permission to exist? That's like a book writing itself, or a light bulb turning itself on without power. Philosophers call this ontological dependence, the idea that to exist at all, a thing must be grounded in some kind of cause, essence, or reason. Some atheists and materialists will say, it just happened. The universe is a brute fact, no cause, no reason. But in that sentence lies the very tension. If the universe had no source, then even the principle of causality, the most basic law we know, is suspended. Yet we still trust causality to explain everything within the universe. Why not apply the same standard to the universe? Let's go deeper. If we reject God, we're left with a cosmos that not only made itself, but allowed itself to exist. It's like a door unlocking from the inside, with no one inside. But how does nothing give itself that power? How does non-being grant being a green light? Some philosophers have wrestled with this in terms of metaphysical grounding, asking, what makes something real rather than imagined or potential? And in every case, reality seems to lean on some kind of deeper explanation. Even math and logic, the most abstract things we know, are only accepted because they appear to be grounded in a larger, consistent order. So the question gently presses forward. If the universe is not rooted in anything, not a mind, not a cause, not a purpose, then how did it get its license to be? Was there ever a moment when non-being became being? And if so, what stood outside that process to permit it? This isn't an argument from complexity or design. It's more foundational than that. It's not about how life arose. It's about why anything has the right to exist at all. In quiet contemplation, this question doesn't demand dogma. It simply invites awe. You don't have to be religious or have faith to wonder, why is there something rather than nothing? And who, if anyone, said yes to existence? Being itself must flow from a deeper being, one who is being by nature, and from whom all else quietly borrows the permission to exist. Not forced, not shouted, just recognized in the stillness. If we are not self-existent, then something must be. The container problem. If the universe includes all of space and time, what is it expanding into? If there's no outside of everything, then what does cosmic expansion even mean? The more we learn about the cosmos, the more it seems to stretch our minds beyond what we were designed to grasp. One of the most puzzling concepts in modern cosmology is the fact that our universe is expanding. Space itself, not just the objects within it, is stretching in all directions. But as this idea sinks in, it leads to a profound and often unsettling question. If the universe is everything, then what is it expanding into? This is the container problem, a quiet paradox that challenges the godless framework in a foundational way. In ordinary experience, when something expands, a balloon, a wave, a building, it expands into a space larger than itself. It's contained within something else. But if the universe is all that exists, all of time, space, matter, and energy, then there should be no outside into which it can expand. And yet, it does. Astronomers observe distant galaxies moving away from us, their light redshifted, evidence of the fabric of space growing larger. Scientists aren't saying galaxies are flying through space like debris. They're saying space itself is stretching. But what does that mean when space is supposed to be the container for everything else? In a godless view, the universe is self-contained. It has no outside, no edge, no border. But if that's true, How can it expand? What is it pushing into? And even more strangely, how does nothing stretch? If there is no space outside of space, then how does space grow? This is the heart of the paradox. Some physicists explain this by saying that the universe is not expanding into anything. Rather, it is space itself that is growing, and the idea of outside is a meaningless question. But this kind of answer feels deeply counterintuitive. We are hardwired to think in spatial terms, to picture things as within other things. To say that space is growing but not into anything goes against every natural instinct we have. And here lies the subtle implication. Perhaps that instinct was placed in us for a reason. Even those who fully embrace the godless model admit this is a metaphysical puzzle. The laws of physics operate within the universe, not outside of it, which means there is no physical explanation for the boundaries of space, or its absence of boundaries. There's simply the declaration, the universe expands, but not into anything. Yet this leaves a nagging tension. We're being asked to believe in growth without space, movement without direction, change without dimension. In a theistic worldview, by contrast, space and time are created things, not eternal, not infinite, not all-encompassing. God, in this understanding, exists outside of space and time. That is, he is not bound by the universe's dimensions. So the idea that the universe is expanding, or was created in the first place, fits coherently within a framework where there is something beyond space itself. In a godless worldview, the universe is all there is, and yet its behaviors point beyond itself. Some scientists explore models like multiverses or higher dimensions to make sense of the container problem. Perhaps our universe is a bubble in a vast sea of others, or perhaps there are extra dimensions our senses can't grasp. But each of these ideas simply pushes the paradox further out. If our universe is in a larger realm, what contains that? If dimensions stretch beyond perception, where do they rest? And ultimately, why is there anything at all, let alone something that grows? In peaceful contemplation, the container problem doesn't need to spark fear or confusion. It simply asks us to wonder, why does space act like it's going somewhere if it has nowhere to go? Why does our universe behave as if it is held within something greater? Could it be that it is? This gentle tension doesn't just hint at emptiness, it whispers of something more. That the container we long for, the framework we instinctively seek, may not be more space, but a greater presence, a mind beyond all dimensions. Not something within the universe, but the very source from which it came. Even in the stillness of deep space, it seems it is not empty after all, but held. The Precondition Paradox. Can a universe exist with no preconditions, no laws, no framework, no reason? Imagine truly absolute nothingness. No space, no time, no laws of physics, no logic, just the absence of everything. Yet, here we are, experiencing a universe of consistent laws, structure, and motion. That's the paradox. How could something arise where there are no preconditions? If preconditions can emerge, then they seem to require something prior, a framework or meta-law that underlies everything. Several thinkers have highlighted this. Philosopher Quentin Meaningless challenged the coherence of nothingness as a concept, pointing out that once you speak of nothing having properties, you've already contradicted yourself. Likewise, scientific popularizers like Frank Wilczek have remarked that nothing is unstable. Yet for nothing to be unstable implies it already obeys some principle or law. You can't have the notion of instability or change without a backdrop against which it happens. Modern physics sometimes claims the universe popped into being from a quantum vacuum. Yet even that vacuum obeys physical laws. Quantum mechanics rules the bounce, so it's not true nothingness at all. You might ask, if there were no laws, could such a fluctuation happen? Number the laws must precede the event. But then those laws themselves demand explanation. If they're brute facts, why these laws and not another? And if they come from somewhere else, what undergirds that? We've simply moved the question one layer up, and the paradox deepens. From a skeptic's perspective, maybe the framework of logic and mathematics is timeless and self-justifying. But a self-explanatory framework is still a framework. It's still something. Some philosophers suggest that mathematical structures are necessary and eternal. But why should a purely abstract realm bring forth physical reality? As physicist Sean Carroll noted, we lack a scientific explanation for why laws themselves exist. In calm reflection, imagine yourself in a world without cause, without law, pure silence. Then imagine laws emerging, patterns revealing themselves, stars appearing. What made that transition possible? If the very possibility of law exists, doesn't that point to a deeper ground, an underlying source of order? This paradox quietly suggests that the framework of existence, logic, law, causality, can't emerge from nothing. Yet we know they exist. Could their origin be personal? Could a mind have established them? Perhaps behind the scenes of physics, there is something more fundamental. Let this linger. If laws precede the universe, might the one who planted them in place be the same one who engineered the cosmos, the ultimate lawgiver? The impersonal origin tension. Can deeply personal beings truly emerge from an impersonal beginning? We humans are storytellers. We laugh, we grieve, dream, create art, form relationships, and construct moral values. We form identities, unique selves shaped by choices, memories, hopes, regrets. These are deeply personal qualities: self-awareness, introspection, connection. Yet the widely held view in modern science is that everything began impersonally, from quantum fluctuations, cosmic dust, electrons, and forces operating without purpose or intention. From that unfeeling crucible came you, your unique sense of self, love, wonder, moral longing, all that makes life personal. How can such rich subjective beings emerge from an impersonal origin? Philosopher Thomas Nagel argues that this is more than poetic. It seems intelligently strained. If mind is radically emergent, a wholly new phenomenon that springs from matter without trace, then its existence feels mystical rather than natural. Nagel and Galen Strawson maintain that mind may not arise intelligibly from non-mind. If so, our capacity for introspection, moral concern, and self-reflection might not be accounted for by an impersonal chain of events. Even advocates of panpsychism, who posit that mind is woven into the fabric of reality, imply that consciousness is a fundamental and inescapably personal feature of the universe. That suggests the impersonal origin view skips over deep elements of who we are. Consider, if mind is more than neural firings, if it opens us to love, beauty, suffering, then a universe built only from impersonal matter struggles to account for such experiences. Why would particles, lacking feeling or intention, ever form a being capable of asking, why is there something rather than nothing? Or, what does it feel like to be me? In contrast, if personality and subjectivity are fundamental, if matter isn't the ultimate basis but a canvas for conscious being, then our personal experiences become natural, not accidental. In that view, the order of things starts personal and then unfolds outward into complexity. This tension isn't just academic, it presses into silence before sleep, asking, is the universe really just inorganic, or is mind woven into its very fabric? In those hours, personal self-awareness feels like more than a fleeting glitch. It begins to resonate as if created by something that is itself personal. The impersonal origin. Tension points us toward considering that personal being requires a personal source, something or someone capable of bringing forth persons, not just particles. The moral law paradox. Finally, in this segment, we consider morality. We all sense deep moral instincts, that some things are truly right or wrong, and that people ought to be treated justly, truths should be told, etc. But in a strictly material universe without God, why should these moral laws hold? If values are mere human conventions, then under a godless view, all moral claims reduce to personal preference or social construction. This leads to a paradox. If someone says murder is wrong, an atheist might respond, well, wrong compared to what? There is no objective standard. And yet, if there truly is no objective moral law, then even that statement has no ultimate weight. It's just one opinion among many. The Christian philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche famously pointed out this tension. He proclaimed that God is dead, but immediately realized this undercuts traditional morality. As one source notes, Nietzsche explicitly holds that God does not exist, but also claims that God's non-existence undermines the reality of traditional morality. In other words, he saw that without a transcendent moral lawgiver, notions of right and wrong lose any absolute grounding. It's a bit like dismantling the base of a building and expecting it to stay standing. Another way to see this paradox is through a simple analogy. Imagine moral truths as laws written on a signpost. If there is no writer, no God who authored these laws, what gives them authority? Apologist Greg Koukl put it plainly, reading depends on writing, writing depends on writers. Morality depends on moral laws, and moral laws require a moral lawmaker. If there is no God, Koukl notes, then there are no morals, then there are no good things. This may sound bold, but it underscores the issue. Without an objective ground for goodness, moral language is hard to justify. We still behave as if some things are really wrong, selfishness, cruelty, deceit, even if we deny God. So the moral law paradox asks, if all values are just human agreements, why should we treat them as binding? Why is there a sense of ought or guilt for wrongdoing, if nothing stands above us to say, this truly matters? For a quietly introspective listener, this can be a subtle nudge. Even agnostics often feel that some injustices, slavery, genocide, torture, are truly wrong, not just culturally disfavored. We all recognize a moral law deep down, perhaps. The paradox is this. A godless worldview struggles to explain why we grasp for justice at all. If nothing beyond atoms exists, why do our hearts reject cruelty in an absolute way? This tension doesn't demand a lecture or debate. In the silence before sleep, it simply lingers. Perhaps there is an objective moral North Star, not elusive in its presence, but often overlooked in the noise of the world. Segment 2. consciousness, and meaning without God. The hard problem of consciousness. Consider waking up in the morning. You feel the weight of your body, the taste of coffee, the glow of sunlight. You experience qualia, the redness of a rose, the pain of a stubbed toe, the warmth of a smile. These subjective experiences are the raw, what it's like aspects of mind. Now ask, what is consciousness? In philosophy, this is famously called the hard problem of consciousness. As defined by philosopher David Chalmers, it's the question of why and how physical processes in our brain give rise to subjective experience. No one argues that brains have no electrical activity or chemistry, but the puzzle is, why should certain neural firings produce a feeling of tasting chocolate or sensing beauty? In the early 21st century, even as neuroscience explains more about brain function, the hard problem remains deep. We can locate the neural correlates of consciousness, the brain regions active during sight or emotion, and describe the neural circuitry, but that still doesn't explain why consciousness feels like anything. As one source puts it, we can trace processes and outcomes, yet even after all the relevant functional facts are explicated, there will still remain the unanswered question, why is the performance of these functions accompanied by experience? In other words, you can map every neuron, simulate every reaction, and yet not the faintest glimmer of subjective smell or wonder emerges in the simulation. Why mention this in a discussion of godlessness? Because in materialism, the view that nothing is real except matter and energy, consciousness is supposed to just happen when things get complex. But that feels astonishing. If the brain is just like a machine, why should turning a particular knob produce a conscious glow? Some thinkers feel that consciousness points beyond the physical. It could be taken as a hint that mind itself is a fundamental aspect of reality, not fully reducible to chemistry. As one reflection notes, the very existence of conscious experience, the rich inner world of awareness, is hard to explain on blind mechanics alone. And indeed, even some prominent atheist or physicalist scientists say consciousness is the hardest mystery we face. On a calm night, pondering the stars, one might reflect on consciousness in a quiet way. How strange that I exist as someone experiencing all this. In sleep podcast tone, this is not a frantic argument but a gentle marvel. Who am I, really? Biology can trace sensations from nerve to cortex, but it cannot answer why those signals feel like anything at all. It is natural to wonder, in this relaxed state, if mind might require a deeper explanation than neurons. The hard problem doesn't demand immediate answers. It simply stays as an abiding question. Why am I me, rather than a non-conscious rock? For some, the answer might lie in letting the wonder of consciousness hint at something beyond pure matter. The illusion of free will in materialism. We tend to think of ourselves as the authors of our choices, deciding when to speak, what to eat, who to love, or what path to follow. The sensation of agency feels natural, immediate, and personal. But in a purely material universe, where all things reduce to atoms and chemistry, that freedom becomes deeply questionable. Modern neuroscience has added to the tension. In several studies, researchers have scanned brain activity while volunteers made simple decisions, like pressing a button with the left or right hand. What they found was surprising. Activity in the brain could predict the person's decision before they reported being consciously aware of making it. Sometimes that predictive signal occurred up to 10 or even 11 seconds before the decision felt conscious. If that's true, then what does it say about our sense of control? Are our choices just chemical consequences? Neural dominoes falling in ways we don't fully see? In a godless worldview, the brain is simply matter. Your thoughts and feelings aren't you making decisions. They're the result of previous inputs, your genes, your upbringing, your environment. One thing leads to another, and somewhere along the line, your body moves or your mouth speaks. That's the materialist picture. But here lies the paradox. We don't act like this is true. We hold others accountable. We reflect on past mistakes. We tell ourselves we could have done differently, even in courts, in relationships, and in everyday regret. We assume people had a real choice. So which is it? Are we free agents, or are we passengers watching our brains make choices? Some materialist thinkers argue that free will is just an illusion, a convincing trick played by our biology to help us survive. But if that's true, it leaves a hollow feeling. It suggests that responsibility, guilt, hope, and even love might just be illusions too. Can we really live like that? Others say these neuroscience findings don't disprove free will. They just show the limits of our conscious awareness. Perhaps we're more than we know. Perhaps choice involves deeper levels of mind and experience that science hasn't fully grasped. In the quiet before sleep, this question lingers softly. If you are nothing more than a brain reacting to stimuli, then who is watching? Who is reflecting? Who is wondering right now whether you are truly free? The idea of free will, real, authentic, meaningful choice, seems to resist materialist explanation. And maybe, just maybe, that resistance is telling us something important, something about you. Nihilism versus the hunger for meaning. A world without God can easily slip into nihilism, the belief that life is ultimately without meaning or purpose. If there is no absolute good or bad, if all things are random, then one might conclude nothing really matters. The existential French philosopher Albert Camus described the modern human as confronting an absurd situation. We long for meaning, yet none is evident in a cold universe. In one of his parables, a man at first cries out, "Why waste time? The universe has no meaning, and there is no God to give it one." And Camus concluded that, if there is no God, then life itself becomes meaningless. The idea is stark. Without a transcendent source, values evaporate, and even our achievements fade like footprints in sand. Yet, quietly consider, virtually every person still craves purpose, beauty, love, and something beyond themselves. Some atheists say meaning can be found in human relationships or personal projects, and that's true at one level. But the paradox emerges when we wonder, why do we hunger for meaning if the universe is truly indifferent? Why do we write music, admire sunsets, care about justice, yearn for love, or recoil in coldness when we feel neglected or denied what we deeply desire? If materialism were the whole story, these experiences might seem futile. And yet, we don't live as if nothing matters. We pursue goals, relationships, and ideals as if our lives should count. This suggests to many an inner sense that perhaps the universe holds more than just cold physics. In a calm, reflective tone, one might whisper to themselves, "Even if there is no deity above us, I still feel drawn to truth and beauty as if they are real. I still know that kindness and loyalty seem important in themselves." One finds themselves asking the same gentle question over and over, "Why does my heart care?" The contrast between deep-seated human longing and a godless picture of the world is the Nihilism paradox. It doesn't demand immediate resolution, but it's a seed of wonder. Perhaps the very fact that people continue to dream, to suffer, to hope, hints at something more than mere atoms. It softly challenges us. If everything is just dust, why do we gaze at the stars and feel so small and yet somehow significant? This tension isn't necessarily pushed on others. It is a quiet tug at the soul as one drifts towards sleep. The self-awareness paradox. We don't just perceive the world. We perceive that we perceive it. We don't just have thoughts. We can think about them. That reflective loop, thinking about thinking, is at the heart of self-awareness, a defining feature of human consciousness. It's the question, who is experiencing this thought? Who is reflecting on the reflection? But in a strictly materialist universe, there is no separate thinker, apart from the physical processes in the brain. Consciousness, on this view, is simply neural firings, yet those same neural firings are somehow able to turn inward, to observe themselves. They create an implicit reader, a self-witness. Philosopher Marcus Gabriel referred to this as the paradox of self-consciousness, that the act of observing one's own mind seems to require the very thing being observed to make the observation possible. Imagine trying to locate consciousness in the brain, like finding a spotlight illuminating its own switch. Materialism struggles here. If your brain is purely matter, how can it contain information about itself? Orphan bits of data don't spontaneously build a self-aware agent, yet you are that agent. Your sense of identity persists even as neurons, molecules, and cells constantly regenerate. Consider this. From birth to death, your body changes entirely, every cell replaced. But you wake up each day feeling like you, with continuous memory, character, and identity. In a universe of flux, what anchors the I that watches, remembers, and makes choices? Some propose complexity is enough. At a certain neural threshold, self-reference emerges. Others look to symbolic language, which allows us to frame thoughts like, I think, therefore I am. But these are tools, still made of matter. They point towards something missing, the experiencer. Late at night, in pre-sleep calm, you might gently sense this mystery, that you are. You wonder, matter can't perceive itself, yet I do. If all is material, why would material ever ask, who am I? The self-awareness paradox lingers softly, inviting reflection on what it truly means to be aware of being aware. And if we point to a God who made us, then our self-awareness is not random, but a quiet design. And it seems this awareness exists not just to perceive the world, but to begin perceiving the one behind it. The Qualia Conundrum. Now consider the vividness of being, the redness of a rose, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, even the lingering shock of a painful memory. These are qualia, raw experiences that exist entirely within you. They are what it feels like to experience something. Neuroscience can map brain regions, neural networks, chemical reactions. We can describe wavelengths and spike patterns. But none of that captures what it's like, the felt reality of seeing red or feeling nostalgia. Philosopher David Chalmers coined this as the hard problem of consciousness. Why should physical processes ever give rise to subjective experience? Take the famous thought experiment. A colour scientist named Mary knows everything there is to know about red objects, their physics, biology, psychology. Yet she has only ever seen the world in black and white. When she finally sees red, she learns something new: the experience of red. Physics told her the wavelength, but experience adds a dimension no formula can reduce. This is known as the explanatory gap, the space between describing neural activities and living them. Describing how pain signals fire doesn't tell you what pain feels like. Mapping visual cortex responses doesn't tell you why red looks that particular way. Materialists offer responses. Maybe qualia are illusions, or emergent properties, or higher-order representational states. But even these attempts leave an unsettling residue. They describe objectively how things happen, yet don't explain the subjective. Why the experience at all? In your quiet half-sleep, this question might surface. I am experiencing something, vividly and intimately, yet in my logical world of physics, there is no place for feltness. The Qualia Conundrum isn't needing an answer before sleep. It's designed to linger. Why does being me feel like this right now? Don't you think maybe the answer is not in the neurons, but in the one who made you to feel? The paradox of inner universes. We build rich inner worlds, dreams, memories, fantasies. But in a purely material universe, why do these internal realms even exist? Each night, as we drift off, we enter a landscape of vivid images, emotions, narratives. In dreams we speak, explore, feel joy or fear, entire worlds played out in our minds. We also daydream, imagining future possibilities, alternative selves, grand scenarios. These inner universes are so real that they can shape our moods, decisions, and identities. Yet from the materialist perspective, our brain is just a complex machine. Neurons firing, chemicals moving. It might evolve for survival, processing sensory inputs and coordinating actions. But what evolutionary advantage explains the creation of elaborate internal stories that have no direct interaction with the physical world? If the brain's purpose is to survive and reproduce, why produce dreams of flying or rejoicing? Why reconstruct memories not as data, but as lived emotional experiences? Philosophers call this the imaginative construal problem. In cognitive science, it's noted that humans are homo narrans, storytelling animals. Numerous studies, like those discussed by Guardian author Will Storr, show that our brains naturally and continually craft personal narratives to integrate thoughts and experiences, essential to our sense of self. But why do we project entire scenes, future hopes, and impossible scenarios beyond practical necessity? Materialists sometimes argue that these stories serve as simulation tools, practice for real-world challenges. Dreams might consolidate memories or prepare the brain for danger. But simulations still require inner construction. They ask, why does a flexible computational system exist that can generate not just memories, but counterfactual, poetic, even absurd inner movies? The issue lies deeper. Inside these inner episodes, we're not passive viewers. We feel tension, surprise, joy, and fear as if events matter, though they are not real. It's a kind of embodied subjectivity, completely private and temporal. Unlike physical behavior, inner universes are qualitatively rich. Our brain produces something like a theater with emotional lighting, atmosphere, meaning. If everything is just matter, why does it create meaning-laden narratives? Why the longing and attachment we feel for imaginary friends or impossible futures? This inner world often shapes our real life, our art, decisions, even our moral commitments. The paradox is that our own inner world feels so vividly real, yet arises purely from opaque physical processes. It prompts wonder. Where do these worlds come from, if not from something like mind itself? Could they point to deeper realities beyond atoms? It's quite easy to think it's possible that they are quiet reflections of the deeper mind that made us, the one in whose image our own imagination was formed. The narrative self-paradox. We experience ourselves as main characters in an ongoing story. But if identity is just neural and transient, why do we cling to coherent self-narratives? Every one of us has a story, a beginning, birth, middle, life events, and narrative arc, conflict, growth, purpose. We speak of our life story as if it were authored by us, by fate, by time. The story has protagonists, us, relationships, themes. It gives life coherence and meaning. Yet modern philosophy and cognitive science suggest there is no essential self, just a shifting bundle of perceptions, memories, impulses. The self is an ongoing narrative our brain constructs for coherence. Neurologist Bruce Hood and cognitive science describe the self as an illusion, a center of narrative gravity constructed by the brain. We're not an unchanging soul, but a story that edits itself continuously. Here's the tension. The story of you holds profound weight. Mistakes cause guilt. Broken promises wound. Achievements feel real. Yet the thing that suffers and celebrates is just a storyteller, not an unchanging substance. A narrative fiction that perceives itself as real. Why do we treat these stories as sacred? Why do we feel responsibility within a story that is inherently unstable? Psychological studies show that our life narratives strongly influence well-being because they feel real. We cling to identity, to coherence, even though our memories are unreliable and our sense of self shifts. The paradox arises. We invest our stories with moral and emotional reality, yet they are ephemeral constructions. Imagine constructing a novel inside your head and sobbing when the fictional hero fails, because in that moment, the story was true for your heart. Materialist neuroscience can describe neural correlates of storytelling and memory, but it doesn't explain why we create these narratives with such depth of belief. What drives the brain to craft identity out of chaos? Why does personal meaning hinge on a story we quietly know is speculative? This silence in explanation invites wonder. It seems narrative identity itself, order, meaning, coherence, is not accidental. It hints at something deeper than biology, a self that weaves reality into story. That self is real in some deeper sense. It seems that our longing to make sense of life isn't just a trick of evolution, but a quiet signature, left by an author who first spoke story into being and shaped us in that same image to seek it. The empathy gap. We feel deeply moved by the suffering of those near to us, but why do we often stay distant when pain affects others? Empathy is a foundational part of human experience. We instinctively resonate with someone's joy or discomfort, often mirrored in our own sensations. This is due in part to mirror neurons and perception-action coupling. When we see another person in pain, our brain activates similar neural circuits as if the pain were our own. But here's the paradox. Empathy evolved to help us care for family and close allies, humans or animals, in part because caring increased the survival chances of our group. We're wired for closeness, for known faces. Yet, we shy away when tragedy strikes distant strangers. Studies on compassion fade reveal that people often feel less concern for large groups or faraway individuals, even thousands of people in crisis. We are moved easily by one child in need, but less so when disaster affects hundreds. This suggests our moral intuition is both powerful and limited. What does this mean? Emotionally and biologically, empathy has boundaries. Scientifically, we expect empathy to be rational, consistent, universal. In reality, it isn't. This compassion gap shows us a quiet truth. In a purely material worldview, empathy is exploitable. It helps us bond, reproduce, cooperate, but only locally. Yet in everyday life, we experience a longing to extend care farther. In a reflective moment, like the soft transition to sleep, you might notice this, feeling compassion in your chest, yet aware it may not extend to distant suffering. That tension reflects a paradox. We feel empathy as if it's a universal light, but it shines only locally. In the peaceful hush, you can ask, why do I wish empathy were limitless? Could our partial caring still be a shadow of something more, like a deeper moral compass that beckons us beyond biology? It makes sense that our longing for deeper care is a quiet spark pointing towards something greater than ourselves. The Identity Paradox. We persistently feel like ourselves, yet every cell, memory, and thought shifts. So who is you in all this change? Our bodies renew constantly. Our minds rewire with every experience. Neuroscience tells us the brain is perpetually plastic, reshaping connections moment by moment. Childhood memories fade, new ones form. Our preferences, beliefs, even personalities subtly evolve. Yet, we experience ourselves as coherent. You as a child, a teenager, an adult, the same you. We regret past mistakes, anticipate future growth, and feel continuity across time. We perceive ourselves as moral agents acting within a single story. But in a materialist view, there's no underlying, unchanging you, no soul or essence. We are intricate patterns of change. Cognitive science even labels this the self-illusion. The mind creates a cohesive narrative, a felt identity constructed by memory and interpretation. So here, we find a paradox. We treat our personal story as meaningful, yet it is a fiction. We mourn for past selves, but in reality, those mental states are gone. We hold ourselves accountable, yet the actor in that play disappears across every update. Consider this. You may recall a promise you made years ago. You still feel bound, even though the version of you who made that promise is no longer there. You trust your life story, yet your brain is not a constant. This tension may spark quiet wonder. Why do we value our story so deeply? If identity is fragile and constructed, why does it still carry moral and emotional weight? Perhaps identity is more than particles. Maybe the sense of self is an echo of something deeper, an enduring self that transcends change. Our longing for a stable I reflects the imprint of something greater than ourselves, something that doesn't flicker with change or end with time. The idea that something deeper shapes life helps explain why the story we tell about ourselves feels like a quiet echo of something greater, something that gave us meaning before we even understood it. The Craving-for-Transcendence Paradox. We strive for more than comfort, success, or survival. Why does an atheistic universe spark inner longing for the transcendent? Look around. People across every culture and era seek transcendence. We meditate, pray, listen to music, wander in nature, stare into the night sky. Across time, humanity has created rituals, temples, songs, all pointing beyond immediate experience. But if the universe is purely physical, these yearnings have no inherent target. They exist as neural quirks, yet they shape our lives deeply. Modern psychology even recognizes this. People often report peak experiences, a term coined by Maslow, that feel spiritual or numinous, powerful moments when reality seems greater than ourselves. These aren't just emotional highs, they feel metaphysically significant. Why imagine such a thing? Evolution explains survival and reproduction, but it doesn't explain why our brains create ceremonies, myths, or songs about stars and heavens. This paradox appears because our internal longings are mapped onto nothing, unless something more exists. We mourn dead loved ones, hoping they endure somehow. We feel stirred by grand ideas, beauty, justice, eternity, as if our souls were tuned to recognize something beyond matter. But an atheistic worldview leaves these as side effects without meaning. In the quiet hush before sleep, this tension can rest lightly. You yearn for significance and beauty as if they're real. You feel an ache for connection to more than you. Yet the material cosmos offers no inherent place for this. The paradox doesn't demand a leap of faith. It simply whispers, if longing is deeply human, might it point to a purpose or presence beyond mere atoms? The Rationality Loop Paradox. We trust reason to guide us, but materialism says reason arises from random evolution. How can we trust our tools when materialism undermines them? Belief in materialism relies on reason, logic, argument, evidence. But if our mental faculties evolved purely to promote survival, not truth, how reliable are they at discerning metaphysical reality? Philosopher Alvin Plantinga even suggested naturalism and evolution are incompatible. If cognitive faculties are shaped by survival, we can't assume they reliably track truth, including those assumptions themselves. This is a circularity paradox. We use reason, whose trustworthiness materialism questions, to justify materialism. We rely on reasoning to prove that our reasoning is trustworthy, but that presumes the very thing at stake. It's like pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Cognitive science supports this tension. Our brains are prone to biases, confirmation bias, anchoring, motivated reasoning. Evolution shaped these biases as efficient shortcuts, not perfect truth detectors. We often justify beliefs post hoc to align with group identity or instinct. If our reason is flawed by design, why should we trust it now? In a soft, reflective tone, you can notice this paradox quietly. You're using introspection to question introspection itself. You trust logic even while admissions from materialism remind you that your brain might be tricking you. And yet, you reason anyway. This creates a gentle tension. Reasoning presumes its own reliability. It's not proof of reliability, but an invitation to humility. For seekers in the quiet before sleep, this paradox isn't a stumbling block. It's a signpost. Reason itself is more trustworthy than random matter. It reflects deeper reality. Either we accept it on faith in faithlessness, or we see reason pointing beyond itself. The Dream Paradox. Every night we experience vibrant internal worlds. Why do purely physical brains dream with such meaning and detail? Dreams transport us. We fly, fall, converse, revisit places, feel fear, wonder, love. And yet neuroscience tells us dreams are random firings during REM sleep. They don't serve clear survival functions. Often they're bizarre, emotionally intense, disjointed. Why would survival prioritize a brain narrative with no external payoff? Materialist theories suggest dreams help memory consolidation or problem solving, but they don't fully explain the emotional weight or vivid realism of dream worlds. While humans dreamed on a spaceship or fought ancient wars, the physical body lies still, yet the mind lives a life. Neuroscientist David Chalmers calls consciousness the hard problem, and dreams deepen it. Metaphorically, we sit in a silent theatre of the mind. The paradox arises when we consider, if consciousness is material, why intermingle with fiction, metaphor, emotional resonance, symbols? Materialism reduces consciousness to chemical states, but dreams are soaked in meaning. In the hush of a sleep podcast, listeners might gently reflect. You experienced something real. You laughed, cried, felt exhilarated, though it was just a dream. That inner world feels authentic, meaningful. Why should random brainwaves produce art-laden nights with emotion and narrative? Is consciousness more than neurons? The dream paradox doesn't demand supernatural explanation. It softly invites thought. Mind can transcend matter, or is fundamental rather than emergent. It seems like the texture of dreams points not to illusion, but to reality deeper than physicalism allows. The paradox of hope. Why do we instinctively hope and plan as though life has overarching meaning, even when materialism leaves no room for ultimate purpose? Hope is arguably one of humanity's most distinctive traits. We anticipate tomorrow's sunrise, long for better relationships, dream of breakthroughs. Existential philosophers describe hope as a strained moral project set against despair, a fragile belief in light in the darkness. Yet hope often persists, even when its object seems unattainable. We hope despite doubt, plan despite uncertainty, and trust despite impermanence. If the cosmos is indifferent matter and chance, hope becomes irrational, but deeply ingrained. Evolutionary psychology explains that optimism can aid survival. Hopeful individuals cope better, pursue goals, and influence communities positively. Yet, this is only part of the story. Hope doesn't merely help us survive, it drives us to transcend routine, to imagine a future beyond current limits. It seeks meaning, not just outcomes. Here lies the paradox. If life is purposeless dust, why does hope feel so essential? We hope for justice, for love, for healing, all intangibles that cannot be measured or guaranteed. In a purely material world, hope is a neural trick, but it feels sacred. In peaceful reflection, you may notice this. You hope not just for tomorrow, but for something more. Something that your heartbeat whispers might be true. It's a gentle nudge, asking if hope itself is a glimpse of something beyond just matter. The paradox of empathy in evolution. In a survival-based system, why would deep compassion or sacrificial love evolve if biology prioritizes self-preservation? Empathy and compassion are remarkably widespread among social animals, not just humans. Studies show even chimpanzees console others. In humans, empathy grows beyond kin, extended to strangers, and even abstract causes. But biological models explain this mainly in terms of reciprocal altruism. Caring for others improves chances of mutual survival. Compassion, then, is a survival tool, not a moral imperative. Yet, humans often transcend this boundary. We mourn strangers, we risk ourselves for ideals, we create charities for distant pain. We feel pain for victims we will never meet and rejoice in their release. These acts offer no direct evolutionary payoff. They complicate the survival story. So why do we feel empathy so deeply, even superfluously. Studies in compassion-based therapy demonstrate that empathy can heal not only others, but ourselves. It seems that empathy has a beyond survival dimension. It nourishes meaning, purpose, belonging. In calm, nighttime reflection, consider this. Your compassion stretches in ways that matter little for survival, yet deeply for meaning. You comfort people you've never known, grieve for stories you only read. This reveals a deeper potential in empathy, the capacity for sacrificial love, not because it helps your genes, but because it reflects something more profound about your heart. Yes, it may be biology and evolution, but also the shadow of a reality deeper than evolution alone. The shared meaning illusion. Imagine two strangers from different countries unaware of each other's stories. They see a simple symbol, a heart, a dove, a sunflower, and instantly feel something profound. One thinks love, the other peace, yet both sense a shared depth without words. How is this possible if meaning is purely subjective and culturally bound? Research in psychology shows that certain symbols gain power not through conscious invention, but because they tap into what Jung called the collective unconscious, archetypes deeply embedded in human experience. Likewise, modern psychologists label this phenomenon as symbolic convergence, where shared narratives and symbols unify group consciousness. In simple terms, humans don't just invent meaning. We discover patterns already resonating within our souls. Consider emotional contagion and limbic resonance. Studies reveal that we commonly mirror others' emotions. If someone in a crowd laughs or cries, the rest tend to feel it too. This suggests that certain feelings and expressions are biologically wired and universally recognized, enabling shared emotional responses tied to the same symbols. Yet here's the paradox. If meaning arises purely from biology or culture, how do strangers still converge emotionally on the same symbol without shared context? Why does a lion feel both fearsome and noble across cultures, even if the viewer has never seen one? This hints at layers of meaning beyond individual experience, something universal, something human, and seemingly hints at something timeless. Suppose we dismiss any transcendent source. We're left with evolution, culture, and random chance explaining shared symbolism. But evolution alone explains utility. Why fear the lion? Not why we marvel at its beauty or majesty. Culture explains some symbols, but not why certain shapes, a spiral, triangle, or heart, carry emotional resonance across human history. In quiet reflection, this paradox lingers gently. Two strangers, two hearts, one symbol, and the same inner hum. How do separate minds align on fondness for sunsets, tragic songs, or heroic tales? There seems to be an inner symmetry that transcends atomistic biology. For many, this synchronicity points to something deeper, a shared spiritual heritage woven into the fabric of our being. It invites a whisper. Maybe we're not just isolated chance organisms, but we are threads in a larger pattern. Each shared echo of meaning is like a faint call to a deeper reality, something outside ourselves, sending signals we're built to hear. The Interior World Priority Paradox. Have you ever paused to wonder why ideas, imagination, and dreams, things unseen, shape our choices, our communities, even society itself? This is the paradox of the interior world. In modern thought, especially in materialist circles, many posit that reality equals only what we can touch, measure, or quantify: physical atoms, chemical reactions, brain waves. But experience tells a different story. Our inner life, our hopes, fears, images, beliefs, often has greater impact on the outside world than physical events do. Consider psychology research. Cognitive science shows that our internal beliefs shape perception and behavior in startling ways. One study describes how our brain's reticular activating system filters reality to match our existing beliefs. If you believe you're unlucky, you'll notice the misfortunes and miss the good things. Similarly, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, operates on the principle that by changing internal thought patterns, people can change their lives, their relationships, even their health. But this raises a paradox. If the material world is primary and inner life is only a byproduct, then why does the inner life so often dictate the outer one? Our thoughts influence other people, shape culture, guide history, and yet we treat them like shadow illusions. Think about our dreams or creative visions. Great artists, inventors, and leaders often begin their journey in the mind. They dream, imagine, then transform that dream into reality. Their inspiration starts in the interior world, and yet we don't suspect inkling of unreality when they express those ideas in the external world. Even neuroscience confirms this alignment. Our brain wiring changes when we intentionally rehearse thoughts. Mental rehearsal causes physical restructuring in the neural network, shaping behavior long before we act. So we arrive at a striking paradox. Although materialism supposes consciousness to be a consequence of matter, our choice is the exact reverse pattern. Our thoughts create matter's path. They precede and guide what happens in the physical world. Inner life is treated as secondary, but practically, we live as though it's foundational. In softer terms, the outer world imitates our inner world. As Jung is often paraphrased, all that is outside is also inside. The structures of our inner world shape the architecture of our lives. From a reflective posture, especially as sleep draws near, it's gentle to wonder, if inner world governs outer world, maybe our minds are meant to be that world's blueprint. It seems the interior world isn't accidental or subordinate, but central. You may think to yourself, maybe it was crafted that way, wired into reality by design. Could it be that our capacity to imagine and dream exists for this? That our minds were made to be heartfelt creators, to pour soul onto matter? In many traditions, including biblical thought, imagination and dreaming are sacred, suggesting we don't dream by mistake, but because there's meaning in those dreams. So the paradox softly lingers as an echo. Our thoughts shape reality. Our mind is prioritized over matter in every personal decision, every cultural movement, every creative act. Yet everywhere we hear the same refrain, nothing but atoms. And still, we live as though the invisible matters most. If the unseen shapes the seen, then it seems something invisible yet foundational is at work. At the center of it all is not randomness, but a mind greater than ours. The interior world is more than personal. It points beyond us, quietly revealing that we are not the source. The love against odds paradox. Even in cultures with no shared history or common origin, stories of sacrificial love capture our hearts. Like a parent laying down their life for a child, or strangers risking everything for each other. Yet, from a purely materialist and evolutionary standpoint, these acts seem inefficient and sometimes downright irrational. Why would any gene persist that pushes someone to sacrifice themselves rather than survive? Evolutionary biology offers explanations. Kin selection suggests we protect relatives because they share our genes. Reciprocal altruism proposes we help others expecting future return. Group selection argues cooperative tribes outlast selfish ones. But these theories mainly cover care for kin or practical kindness, not pure self-sacrifice, with no expectation of return. Here lies the paradox. Humans often admire and enact love that seems to work against evolutionary incentives. Consider public figures giving away all their wealth for strangers, or individuals risking their lives to save unknown victims. Psychological studies affirm that these acts, often termed warm glow-giving, bring deep emotional satisfaction despite no material gain. This emotional reward isn't about survival. It's about connection, meaning, identity. Anthropologists also note that this behavior is especially pronounced in cooperative breeders, humans among them, who display altruism toward non-kin as a byproduct of child-rearing across communities. Chimpanzees will help strangers and vampire bats share food with non-relatives, suggesting that something in our evolutionary wiring encourages generosity beyond bloodlines. Yet what moves beyond explanation into the realm of wonder is the depth of human love, acts of bravery, sacrifice, forgiveness, and beauty that often cost much more than they yield biologically. The paradox. Why would evolution produce beings capable of transcending self-interest so profoundly? This tension invites a deeper reflection. There is reason to believe sacrificial love isn't merely a genetic quirk, but a glimpse of something beyond survival mechanics. It echoes the stories we tell about moral heroes, saints, and martyrs, figures who choose others over themselves in ways that defy simple utility. Consider this. When we feel stirred by selfless acts, we sense something sacred, something that whispers there is more to life than survival. That stirring certainly doesn't feel accidental or trivial. It suggests that love holds a unique place in our nature, deep enough that many find it pointing beyond themselves toward a source of love itself. The love against odds paradox isn't meant to demand conversion. Rather, it holds space for wonder. Even a mind attuned to science might find itself pausing. Where does such love come from? This capacity seems to point to a reality greater than evolutionary probability. For some, that becomes a seed of reflection. Love, beauty, and purpose without grounding. Finally, in this segment, consider the beautiful things that fill our lives. A moving piece of music, a vivid sunset, an act of selfless kindness. In a godless world, these experiences still exist, but what makes them truly more than chemical reactions or evolutionary tricks? Take love, for example. Our brain releases endorphins and dopamine when we bond, yes. But why does love feel so profound, so like an echo of something eternal? The same could be asked of art or moral heroism. It all feels meaningful. Some philosophers argue that our sense of beauty and purpose might itself point to a reality beyond the physical. The argument from beauty notes that humans around the world independently recognize beauty in nature, music, and even mathematical formulas. The universal experience of the sublime, the way a mountain vista or a heartfelt poem moves us, is surprising if it is only an accident of neural wiring. As one commentary on philosophy notes, the experience of beauty is evidence of the existence of a universal God. While that statement comes from a theistic perspective, it captures an intuition. Beauty and love seem too grand and persistent to be explained fully by blind chance. In other words, these immaterial wonders might hint at something beyond the merely material. On a peaceful evening, you might gently reflect on a loved one's smile or recall a moment of deep compassion you witnessed. Even without words, you feel there is something holy or eternal in love. Similarly, when seeing the night sky or listening to music, you might whisper to yourself, "Isn't this amazing? Is there a greater love or truth behind it all?" The paradox is subtle. A purely material universe has no built-in place for love or beauty, yet we live as if they are real and important. This suggests an inner hunger or acknowledgement. It could be said softly, perhaps these feelings are like signposts pointing beyond themselves. Of course, one can deny any ultimate grounding for beauty or purpose, but many find that the very existence of these longings and the irrefutable reality of love are worth pondering. Segment 3. Science, Math and Logic Without a Designer. The mathematical structure of the universe. The universe is astonishingly orderly. Every time we probe nature, we find that mathematics, pure abstract math, fits reality in uncanny ways. Physicist Eugene Wigner famously called this the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in science. He marveled that abstract formulas, discovered in pure thought, so accurately describe planets, forces, and life. As he put it, the enormous usefulness of mathematics in the natural sciences is something bordering on the mysterious. Another time he remarked that the miracle of math-fitting physics is a wonderful gift which we neither understand nor deserve. Why mention this to an agnostic listener? Because a universe that accidentally produced a mathematician, you, and then was describable by his math feels quite remarkable. It seems as if the cosmos is written in a language we understand, so exactly that it almost suggests a mind behind it. At the very least, it invites the question, if our brains themselves evolved by blind mutations, why should they be tuned to uncover the true structure of reality? In a godless worldview, you and I are just evolved animals, yet those animals have discovered calculus, prime numbers, and relativity. This seems deeply mysterious. In a calm, sleepy tone, one might muse, imagine the vast cosmos and the starry night, and consider that simple abstract numbers, like pi or the square root of -1, help us describe it. Wigner noted that even imaginary numbers, like the square root of -1, appear in quantum physics in a way we neither understand nor deserve. In a materialist picture, abstract concepts shouldn't necessarily correlate with physical things, yet they do. Something about reality clicks with math. This might hint that reality has an underlying order akin to a thought. We don't jump to conclusions. We simply notice this structural harmony and gently ask, why should math work so well unless the universe has an intelligible order from the start? Information theory and DNA. Now consider biology. Life is astonishingly information-rich. Our DNA is often likened to a genetic code, a long string of chemical letters that instructs every living cell how to build proteins. Indeed, DNA uses a digital code with just 4 letter types to specify thousands of proteins. This is remarkably similar to how human-written computer code uses binary digits to specify actions. In fact, some argue DNA is best thought of as information or language stored in molecules. This leads to a philosophical reflection. In our experience, all codes and language we know are created by minds. Every computer program, every text message, every encryption, these are engineered by intelligence, and DNA seems like a code. Perry Marshall, in a lengthy discussion with skeptics, summed up the intuition. DNA is not merely a molecule with a pattern. It is a code, a language. All codes are created by a conscious mind. Therefore, DNA was designed by a mind. He collected many objections, but remained convinced that DNA's complex coding points back to intelligence. Of course, evolutionary biologists would explain DNA through natural processes, mutations, natural selection, etc. But the philosophical urge is to ask, why should physical chemicals spontaneously start behaving like meaningful codes? If our universe has no mind behind it, yet we have this line of code defining our cells, it can feel like a clue. In a restful, curious tone, one might think, how did these molecules become an information repository? Is there something like language at the heart of life? Some find it striking. Some don't claim a final answer. Rather, they gently acknowledge that life's coding seems to echo the realm of thoughts and knowledge, which in other contexts always comes from minds. Logic's immaterial nature in a material world. Let's turn to logic. When you solve a puzzle or follow an argument, what are you operating with? Numbers? Patterns? Importantly, you're operating with abstract rules of reasoning that are not physical things. The rule, if all dogs are mammals, and if Rover is a dog, then Rover is a mammal, is true irrespective of any matter. There is no mammaliness molecule in nature. It's an immaterial truth. This idea that laws of logic, mathematics, morality, even meaning, are not material things has been pointed out by philosophers. One list of things that are real but not physical includes logic, reason, ideas, love, truth, and many others. The list notes, logic is not physical, reason is not physical, ideas are not physical, truth is not physical. In plain terms, the rules of logic don't live inside neurons or quarks. They exist in a realm of abstract relations. Yet in a strictly materialist worldview, everything is supposed to be particles and forces. How do immaterial, logical truths exist in a world of only atoms? This is a soft philosophical paradox rather than an empirical one. We cannot physically point to 2 + 2 = 4 in the brain, yet you rely on that truth every day. If minds are just matter, why should they grasp the immaterial laws they themselves abide by? Some thinkers have noted that a purely physical brain could not validate its own reasoning without a strange assumption that the immaterial rules of logic somehow emerge from matter. We mention this not to argue forcefully, but to inspire calm wonder. The next time we use an argument or a number, we might pause and say quietly, "These rules I follow have no physical substance, yet they guide everything I do." This peaceful observation can leave one with a sense that perhaps the tapestry of reality includes both the seen and the unseen, laws and patterns that are real, yet not made of stuff. Why we trust reason in an accidental brain. This brings us to the ultimate paradox in this segment. Why trust our own minds? If our brains are the product of random evolution or blind physical forces, why should they lead us to truth? Evolutionary biology teaches that our senses and thoughts have been shaped for survival, not necessarily for metaphysics or logic. Philosopher Alvin Plantinga put it bluntly, if both naturalism and evolution are true, it might be that our belief in these very ideas is not reliable. As he explains, if natural evolution simply favoured survival traits, our cognitive faculties could well favour usefulness over truth. In fact, Charles Darwin himself once wrote of a horrid doubt, given our animal origins, whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. In the stillness of a quiet night, Consider, if our convictions evolved by chance survival, can we trust them to discern anything like the true nature of the universe? We speak and reason, daydream and philosophize, yet on a materialist account, those faculties are mechanical. So there is a paradox. We rely on reason to assert rational philosophies, even though rational philosophy is what might be called into doubt by the starting assumptions. To state it simply, if all we are is a biological accident, why trust the outcomes of those accidents? This isn't meant to dismiss science. It's more a reflective unease. It's like asking the dreamer to question if their dream logic is valid. In a soothing voice, one might say, if my thoughts are simply a brain's wiring, I should remember humility. I'm using the very thing to judge whether it works. This gentle self-questioning highlights a tension, but is said not angrily, but almost humorously. For the materialist to claim, I trust my mind, is to beg the question, since trusting the mind to validate itself requires trust in the mind. The paradox is quiet but compelling. Without something deeper, the very bedrock of reasoning feels uncertain. The intimate trust we place in math, code, logic, and even our own reasoning is surprising if all is accidental. These subtleties suggest the calm thought that perhaps reason itself hints at a deeper order. The paradox of predictive order. If everything is random or accidental, why can mathematics predict nature so precisely? From planetary orbits to quantum mechanics, math describes reality with uncanny accuracy. Physicist Eugene Wigner famously called it the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. Equations foretold planetary movement long before telescopes confirmed them. Mathematical models predicted phenomena like electromagnetic waves, black holes, and atomic behavior, years before human instruments could observe them. Yet mathematics is an abstract human creation, rooted in symbols, theories, and logical structures. How can this invention align so perfectly with physical nature? We tailor equations to fit, but often our math models make startling predictions, like general relativity explaining Mercury's orbital anomaly, or Dirac predicting antimatter. Some suggest this is selection bias. Only useful math is remembered. While partly true, the breadth of math suggests something more profound. Entire branches of abstract pure math, developed without real-world intent, later find natural applications, sometimes decades later. Complex numbers, once considered purely theoretical, became central to quantum physics. If the universe is merely random, why does it seem to follow an intelligible, discoverable structure? Why do our human minds, products of evolution, tap into these deep laws through pure thought? It feels less like coincidence and more like an invitation. Like reality is structured in such a way that abstract reasoning touches truth beyond survival. Consider that your mind can grasp universal patterns through ideas. That precision has no obvious evolutionary advantage, yet it exists. Why? This harmony quietly points beyond blind chance to a deeper intelligibility, something consistent with the presence of meaning, design, or a mind behind appearance. Information Origin Paradox. Where did the original data in our universe come from? If nothing created it, how did complexity arise? Our universe is drenched in information. DNA's genetic code, the precise cosmic microwave background pattern, the distribution of galaxies, all embody highly ordered information. In physics, information relates to low entropy states, order arising from chaos, and local decreases in entropy require compensating increases elsewhere. But where did that original structure emerge? Modern science suggests that according to the second law of thermodynamics, local order can increase, but only if greater disorder emerges elsewhere. Yet the complexity seen at the universe's birth seems too structured to be a spontaneous accident. Even quantum fluctuations, like physicist Edward Tryan's proposal that our universe began as a vacuum fluctuation, don't explain why the background was structured enough to support life, meaning, or consciousness. In computers or books, information always comes from intelligence. A written page, a program, a code, these are designed. Yet in the cosmos, we see information as if encoded into reality. We speak of the cosmic code in DNA or the laws of physics. But if there is no underlying mind, where does this information originate? How can non-rational processes generate the kinds of ordered complexity that life requires? Consider this gently. Your own DNA encodes countless lines of information, guiding growth, thought, emotion. That information didn't appear by random shuffling of atoms. It arises from biological processes, themselves dependent on prior information. If we keep tracing back, we reach a question. Where did the first information come from? In the calm space before sleep, you might whisper to yourself, I am built from holographic data, encoded codes guiding life and thought. Ask yourself quietly, does this echo of design, this structured information, feel like a shadow of intention? Or can randomness alone give rise to the code that makes you you? The Observer Effect Paradox. Why does consciousness, or at least measurement, appear to affect reality at the quantum level? In everyday life, observation changes things. Checking a tire's pressure lets a little air escape. Using a thermometer slightly cools a liquid. But in quantum mechanics, the effect goes deeper. When measuring tiny particles, like electrons or photons, the very act of observing, detecting which slit a photon passed through in the double-slit experiment, actually alters the outcome. The mysterious interference pattern vanishes, and particles behave like solid bits. Some interpret this to mean that consciousness itself collapses the wave function. Notable names like Niels Bohr and Eugene Wigner even speculated that a conscious observer is key to shaping reality. But most physicists now believe collapse happens when any interaction occurs, whether or not it involves consciousness. Still, the paradox remains. We live in a world where measurement, even by inanimate instruments, affects the outcome. But the line between observer and system feels oddly reminiscent of consciousness. In a purely material cosmos, why would brute matter care about being measured? And why would reality appear to respond when someone or something looks? This paradox invites curiosity. We experience a universe where measurement changes things. What is an observer? Why do our minds, or our presence at all, seem woven into the fabric of reality? Is it possible that consciousness isn't just a product of matter, but a participant in creation itself? Or does the universe quietly insist that some deeper connection underlies both measurement and mind? Rather than suggesting mere possibility, it seems it reveals something more certain. That consciousness flows from a deeper awareness, an eternal presence that not only observes, but sustains everything. The universe doesn't just respond to us. It reflects the source that made us able to perceive it. The paradox of symmetry and aesthetic elegance. Why is the universe not just functional, but also beautifully symmetric and elegant? Look closely at the laws of physics. They are stunningly symmetrical. Einstein's relativity depends on symmetry in space-time. Maxwell's equations reveal symmetry between electric and magnetic fields, and Noether's theorem shows that symmetries give rise to conservation laws like energy or momentum. Symmetry is not just practical, it appears deeply beautiful. Nobel laureates like Liederman and Hill describe reality's elegance as supremely elegant and marvel that universe order resonates with deeply aesthetic principles. Yet, true perfection is empty. Oversimetry becomes dull. Too much order lacks surprise. Human aesthetics often favor balanced imperfection, art, nature, architecture, to engage interest. Physics mirrors this balance. Theories highlight symmetry. Nature breaks it just enough, as with the weak force violating mirror symmetry. Why does the cosmos favor this middle way, not chaotic randomness nor rigid perfection? And why does human intuition of beauty mirror it? If matter is blind and purposeless, inexplicable is why nature obeys symmetric laws and we perceive them as beautiful. Such harmony suggests something deeper. In the soft glow of thought before sleep, you may feel this resonance, glimpsing beauty in plants, music, math, all reflections of order in nature. Just think, could it be that aesthetic balance is more than subjective? It reflects a mindful grounding in reality. Do you think the elegance of physics may be a whisper of intelligent design or cosmic intention? The equation paradox. The night sky is quiet, but the universe whispers through delicate equations, like Euler's identity, Dirac's formulation, or Einstein's general relativity. Why is it that these abstract strings of symbols, intangible, immaterial, can describe reality so precisely? Philosophers call this the equation paradox. Why do some of the most elegant, minimalist equations match the workings of our physical world? Take Euler's identity. E to the power of I pi plus 1 equals 0. It brings together 5 fundamental mathematical constants, E, I, pi 1, and 0, in a single hauntingly simple equation relation point. Many mathematicians regard it as the most beautiful equation ever, one that resonates in both the mind and the heart. In physics, too, elegance becomes evidence. Dirac famously stretched this idea further. A physical law must possess mathematical beauty. His equation predicted antimatter, a purely mathematical insight that later matched experimental reality. This match between elegant formula and cosmic truth feels uncanny. Renowned physicists like Eugene Wigner and Albert Einstein noted this as well. Wigner called it the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in nature, and Einstein frequently stated he would only trust elegant physical theories. What's going on? Why does the world follow these refined rules? Consider, if everything is random or accidental, there's no reason for your brain, itself an accident, to recognize or even align with such precise, elegant structures. Elegance in equations causes brain activity in the same emotional regions as art and music. That suggests our souls are wired to sense meaning and beauty, even in abstract forms. This is more than coincidence. When Newton unified terrestrial and celestial mechanics, or when Maxwell's equations condensed electricity, magnetism, and light into a single elegant framework, it wasn't because nature had to be this way. It was because someone saw the pattern, found the beauty. Yet beauty doesn't guarantee truth. String theory is mathematically elegant, but it still awaits empirical proof. Elegance guides theory, but it isn't definitive. Still, the paradox remains. Why would the universe be written in beauty that our minds not only can read, but also feel in a profound way? It's not hard to see that it's evidence of design, of a mind behind the math. If a mind crafted the cosmos, then perhaps beauty is its signature. C.S. Lewis once noted beauty is something more than evolution added to survival machinery. It's a show of something greater. In restful reflection, let this paradox linger. Why does the universe seem to favour elegant equations? Why do these equations stir feelings like poetry or sunrise? And why, if we are mere accidents, would we perceive this harmony? If not because there is a harmony deeper than both. The language launch paradox. How did communication systems evolve before the concepts they now express were even formed? Picture early humans living in small groups, long before fully formed language. They lacked words for hope, love, or even tool, yet eventually developed systems to express those very ideas. Darwinian forces may explain simple signals like an alarm grunt for danger, but not how a symbol for tomorrow or friendship emerged before those words even existed in the collective mind. Derek Bickerton, in Adam's Tongue, suggests early humans used iconic imitations, say miming a mammoth's shape, to point toward things in the world. These gestures were context-bound, tied directly to present action. Over time, such signals became decontextualized, evolving into proto-language, placeholders for ideas, not just lived experiences. Still, this leaves a conceptual gap. To have words, you need concepts. To have concepts, you need words. Which comes first? This is the heart of the paradox. Communication and meaning seem to grow in tandem, but evolution presumes one must precede the other. The chicken and egg question emerges. How did the first abstract concept form without a symbol to hold it? Some propose that our ancestors had innate grammar or universal structures wired into their DNA, Chomsky's merge mechanism, a genetic leap that allowed language to spontaneously appear. Others see language as emergent, arising from social interaction and pattern recognition, without a pre-wired blueprint. Yet consider this tension in the stillness before sleep. We use language to reflect on language. We speak to ask, what does language mean? We reason in words about reason. If words are needed to form meaning, yet meaning is needed to form words, what bridged that gap? In a godless, purely materialist story, this paradox remains a puzzle, that humans would randomly assemble a system to reflect on itself, symbols about symbols, feels astonishing. Like discovering a mirror on the nightstand that can reflect itself endlessly. Some find the idea of mindless matter producing metacommunication implausible. Others accept it as an evolutionary miracle. But it seems clear, the mind that speaks echoes a mind that spoke first. What could be the origin of meaning itself if nothing ever intended it? If intentions require an intender, then language demands purpose before symbols. In that calm pause of thought, we begin to see. Meaning had to begin with someone. The simulation irony. If our universe is a simulation, a popular modern view, doesn't that imply a creator, digital or divine? In contemporary discussion, the simulation hypothesis suggests our entire reality might be a sophisticated simulation, run by higher intelligences, perhaps advanced aliens, future humans, or even digital entities. Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom framed it as a trilemma. Either no advanced civilizations survive long enough to simulate ancestors, or they choose not to. Or, here's the striking conclusion, we are almost certainly within one such simulation. Settled comfortably into our daily awakenings, we might imagine a game developer booting up and, with a click, unleashing galaxies, life, consciousness, and us. It's a futuristic twist on the age-old idea that our world, with its complexity and drama, must have a designer. But here is the paradox. This theory, often proposed as counter to traditional theism, actually circles right back to a theological intuition. If everything we experience is designed, our thoughts, the stars, the moral rhythms, then that design has origin. A simulator demands a simulator, and this chain points to a creator outside the simulated universe. Some contemporary philosophers, most notably David Chalmers, say the simulation hypothesis is the strongest form of modern argument for God. If we are simulated, there must be a real being or beings who crafted this reality. That being, by definition, sits outside our simulation, beyond time, space, and perhaps even these laws we take as absolute. The mind behind reality is not some distant, impersonal force. It is a transcendent, intelligent creator, whose wisdom and love surpass all understanding. Science does not limit who this mind is. Rather, it points us toward the one who sustains all things. Critics point out that the simulation hypothesis shifts the mystery higher, not solves it. We still ask, who built the simulator? What explains its world? If we are simulated, the simulator is effectively our God, and we must then wonder about their origins. You cannot dodge transcendence merely by moving the discussion into digital code. And here's another tension. If we accept the simulation idea, it carries philosophical weight. If someone designed layers of reality from bits to beings, then design is fundamental to existence. It isn't just physical laws or life's complexity anymore. It's purpose and intentionality embedded in the very structure of the cosmos. There are further ironies. If we imagine post-humans creating ancestor simulations, we run into a multiverse of simulations, like turtles all the way down. Somewhere, though, one reality has to be the base. That base must be first cause, uncreated, transcendent. In the stillness before sleep, you can ask, what if the simulation isn't the limit, but a pointer beyond us? Yet, even within the hypothesis, we find elements of traditional theism. The simulator is a controller of laws, events, perhaps morality. We attribute meaning, coherence, structure, and those things come from mind. The simulation irony whispers this gently. Suppose you could prove your world was simulated. Not only that, but that the simulator fundamentally shaped it. Would you still reject the idea of a creator? This isn't about forcing belief, but inviting honest reflection, recognizing that even the most cutting-edge, seemingly atheistic ideas point to a transcendent mind behind all things. It seems clear. Far from disproving God, the simulation hypothesis leads us back to the creator. The initial conditions paradox. From the very moment of the Big Bang, our cosmos appears to have been set with astonishing precision. The initial conditions, temperature, density, entropy, were arranged in such a fine-tuned balance that only a razor's edge difference could have led to a lifeless universe. Physicist Roger Penrose dramatized this by calculating the odds of the universe's initial entropy being as low as it was. The probability, 1 in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. To grasp that, picture this. If every atom in our universe were turned into paper and used to inscribe the number, we still wouldn't have enough space. This suggests the early universe was not just special, it was unimaginably special. Why does this matter? Because such a low entropy beginning is essential. If the universe began with slightly higher entropy, structures, stars, planets, galaxies could never form. Likewise, the average density had to be almost perfectly balanced. If it were off by 1 part in 10 to the 62nd power, the universe would have either collapsed back on itself or expanded too fast for stars to coalesce. Cosmologists label these puzzles as the flatness problem and the horizon problem, both tied to the initial conditions, and note that cosmic inflation theory addresses them. Still, inflation itself demands its own finely tuned start. It doesn't explain it away, it simply shifts the puzzle slightly. So the paradox stands. Why did the universe begin in this exceptionally fine-tuned state? There are broadly 3 categories of answers. Chance. It was just incredibly unlikely luck. Multiverse. Billions of universes exist, each with different settings. We inhabit the one tuned for life. Design. A mind or intelligence established the conditions purposefully. Philosopher Robin Collins explains that among the vast landscape of possible initial conditions, only a minuscule fraction, a fortunate universe, could support complexity. This makes accidents seem unlikely unless paired with an unseen multiverse or metaphysical scaffolding. Critics of design argue that chance and the anthropic principle suffice. If we can only exist in one of the life-permitting universes, then it's no surprise we observe such fine-tuning. But even that answer assumes there is a space of universes, a framework that has to exist and obey rules for those variations to occur. In other words, the multiverse answer may solve one initial condition problem, but assumes an even larger metaphysical stage. Here's the question that stays with you. The cosmos began not just simply, but in an exquisitely ordered way, so deliberate that even after inflation theory, we're left asking, why did it start with that order? In the calm before sleep, this may feel like more than coincidence. It feels like a question begging for an explanation beyond random chance. It seems that an ultimate source or mind set things in motion with intent, not by accident. Even if you remain unsure, the wonder remains. Why was the start of everything so precisely plotted? The initial conditions paradox invites us to see that deep probabilities and frameworks did not arise by fluke, but point to a voice, a plan, behind the cosmos's beginning. The Axiomatic Mystery. Science and math rest on unprovable assumptions, axioms that we can't derive from less. These include the uniformity of nature, laws are consistent across time and space, logical rules, non-contradiction, identity, causality, and mathematical postulates. We accept these basics on trust, not proof. Without them, science collapses. Yet why do these axioms work so well? Logic isn't a physical thing. It's an abstract framework. Uniformity isn't observed. It's assumed as a premise for experiments. Causality is taken as self-evident, but philosophers like Hume questioned it. And modern science doesn't prove it, it presupposes it. Gödel's incompleteness theorems showed that any consistent axiomatic system that can express arithmetic will contain true statements it can't prove, and cannot prove its own consistency. Likewise, we cannot justify the foundational rules of science within science itself. This raises a question. If the foundations of reason and inquiry are assumptions, where do they come from? And why should they align with reality? Imagine lying awake, half awake, considering this. the structure of reality aligns with the rules of logic, mathematics, and causality. If these were mere inventions, why do they work so precisely, so predictively, across the vast scales of the cosmos? To call this a lucky accident strains credulity. This isn't about offering proof, but opening space for wonder. Our trust in logic and order reflects more than evolutionary happenstance. It reflects a reality structured from the start. Even if you are still unsure, you can sense this quietly. The universe is built to reason within, not merely to be sensed. Segment 4. Philosophical and Cultural Collapse. The Paradox of Moral Relativism. In a wholly godless worldview, many people conclude that all moral values are relative, that good or evil depend entirely on individual or cultural perspective. On the surface, this seems tolerant, but it leads to a paradoxical outcome. If all moral claims are merely personal or cultural opinions, then one can never say a practice is truly wrong for everyone. On a relativist footing, even condemning intolerance itself would be just your perspective. In effect, moral relativism can become self-defeating. To see why, consider this thought. If someone claims there are no absolute morals, this claim itself is supposed to be universal and absolute. Yet, according to their own rule, that claim has no more authority than any other view. So the statement undermines itself. In simpler terms, if relativism is true, then it cannot be truly true, since the notion of a universal truth is denied. This paradox means that moral relativism, when fully applied, collapses into skepticism or chaos. Another way to capture this is to consider societal progress. If every morality is equally valid, then how does society decide to improve? Concepts like justice, human rights, or scientific truth themselves become relative. In such a world, the very idea of progress is illusory. Progress toward what, if nothing is objectively better? Some observers warn that when truth is declared relative, we can no longer rely on a shared reality at all. As one recent commentator put it, if the truth becomes relative, then we can no longer rely on reality. And if we can no longer rely on reality, the world basically jumps off a cliff into chaos. In other words, without some standard outside ourselves, every claim cancels itself out. Philosophically, this is sobering. If we deny any higher moral law, then even saying murder is wrong is just a personal declaration, not something that holds for all. The cultural result can be a kind of moral paralysis or cynicism. People feel lost asking, "What should I do?" when any answer might be arbitrary. This is one of the paradoxes of a godless world. In trying to avoid one dogma, we unwittingly step into another chaotic dogma, that all opinions are equally valid, which is itself a kind of absolute claim. In peaceful reflection, one might gently acknowledge this tension. Perhaps the longing many feel for justice or truth hints that we need some anchor beyond ourselves. The paradox of progress without truth. Closely linked is the idea of progress. We like to think of history as improving. Medicine cures diseases, science reveals secrets, and societies become freer. But progress implicitly trusts in some underlying truth or goal. For example, to say humanity is advancing morally assumes there is an objective moral good we are approaching. If instead all values are personal, progress becomes just change. Without an objective standard, one cannot say whether change is better or worse. Progress in technology, like building faster machines, is easy to measure, but progress in meaning or virtue becomes mysterious if nothing is truly good or true. This paradox is subtle. Think of scientific progress without truth. If theories are only judged by taste or utility rather than correspondence to reality, the whole endeavor becomes aimless. Similarly, social progress, greater equality, say, assumes some moral truth about human dignity. In a relativist vacuum, asking, "Are we better off?" is puzzling because better has no basis. The paradox is that a society that denies absolute truth still often acts like truth is very important. We create laws, hold courts, pass judgments, all acts which quietly rest on the idea that some actions really merit praise or blame. So again, one can see a quiet conflict. We talk of advancing toward more humane cultures, even while denying any fixed moral north. It's a bit like building on quicksand. The gentle thought might be, what if our inner sense of improvement is trying to tell us something about a reality we've set aside? Meaning, making in a meaningless world. Earlier we touched on the hunger for meaning. Here we see the broader cultural implication. If life has no inherent meaning, people still weave meaning into their lives. Philosophically, they say life is absurd, yet individually they craft purposes, family, art, knowledge. The paradox is that despite an official stance of meaninglessness, humans act as if meaning is crucial. One could say culture itself is engaged in an endless process of meaning-making, stories, goals, values, to fill the void. This can be seen as creative and hopeful, but also as a kind of tragedy. We are creatures that must create significance out of nothing. It's like being placed in an empty field and asked to erect our own landmarks. The tension is quiet but real. On one hand, the world is supposedly purposeless. On the other, people long to leave footprints. A reflective observer might simply note, imagine people everywhere struggling to create meaning. Perhaps this very struggle is an unspoken nod to something they feel is missing. The paradox of denying the soul while craving eternity. Finally, consider this gentle paradox. Many, especially in secular cultures, have moved away from believing in an immortal soul or life after death. Yet almost universally, people hope for something that endures beyond their mortal life, whether it's being remembered, living on through children, or dreaming of space travel and longevity science. We dream of breaking free from the limits of time, even as we insist death is final. There's a famous biblical verse that captures this idea. He has set eternity in the human heart. Ecclesiastes 3:11. Even if one doesn't share the verse's meaning, it's hard to deny the sentiment. Every generation seems aware of eternity, and yet grapples with it in emptiness or paradox. In stillness, one might gently ask, if I am truly just chemical, why do I feel this urge for forever? A world that denies the soul but still yearns for the infinite has an inner tension. Perhaps we are drawn to things that hint at eternity. Love deeper than time. Art that outlives us. Science reaching to other planets. The paradox is that we claim mortality, yet our deepest dreams suggest we know, somehow, that mortality isn't all there is. Throughout human history, this longing has taken many forms. In a secular age, it might be transhumanist dreams of cyber immortality, or just living on in memories. Either way, it's a curious thing. Whether we admit it or not, each of us feels something eternal, something beyond. This subtle ache can be comforting or unsettling. Comforting because it reminds us that perhaps we were made for eternity, and unsettling because it suggests a gap between our worldview and our hearts. This isn't about pushing belief, but about inviting honest reflection, because many across time from philosophers to poets, have wondered whether our longing for something greater is not weakness, but a quiet echo of truth. Perhaps the instinct that there's more to this life is not a delusion, but a signal. The paradox of secular purpose. How can secularism promote purpose and flourishing without invoking transcendence? Modern secularism encourages us to find meaning within humanity, relationships, work, community, and shared values. Some scholars herald this as a new paradigm, with secular life capable of producing moral depth and fullness, even without religious belief. Secular humanists point out that compassion, justice, and purpose are within human reach. Yet a tension remains. If all meaning is self-constructed and comes from community and projects, but nothing transcends us, then purpose is inherently fragile. Celebrating today's values simply means tomorrow's may be equally valid or discarded. In such a worldview, purpose becomes subjective, often lacking weight against suffering, injustice, or mortality. The paradox emerges. Secularism nurtures purpose and connection, yet it rests on a foundation that denies ultimate meaning. In the hush before sleep, one might observe this. We feel driven to improve, grow, connect. But there's no cosmic guarantee. Our moral convictions, our hopes for tomorrow, all emerge from human consensus, not universal grounding. If purpose isn't universal, why does it feel universal? Why do we hold injustices as objectively wrong, even in secular societies? The very emotional power of purpose and moral commitment seems to cry out for something beyond our own making. This isn't a demand for belief, but a whispered curiosity. Think, is it possible that our deepest convictions are calling us home to something more? Does secular purpose alone truly suffice to fill the silent ache inside? The suffering for growth paradox. Why do our most profound transformations often come through pain, even if the universe is indifferent? Across cultures and history, suffering is seen as a crucible for growth. Psychology calls it post-traumatic growth. Many report new meaning, resilience, empathy, or life appreciation after hardship. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, famously spoke of finding meaning in suffering, suggesting adversity can produce profound inner renewal. Yet, suffering is not designed or teleological in a godless universe. Random tragedy, illness, grief, they occur without reason. Evolutionary biology explains pain as a mechanism, signals warning us of threats, building resilience, but not moral growth. Organisms survive, but growth isn't promised. There is no subtle purpose in pain. The paradox is stark. We treat suffering as if it matters deeply, forging character, awakening compassion, inspiring art, humility. But if the universe is blind, why should hardship yield anything meaningful? In quiet reflection before sleep, one might feel the paradox like this. Your hardest moments shaped you, taught you, opened your heart. You didn't choose them, yet they changed you. If reality is purposeless, why do your scars feel holy? Why do you cherish inner transformation when it comes through pain? This isn't a moral given, but a restful wonder. Perhaps suffering isn't just random noise in an indifferent cosmos. Perhaps it is a pathway, unexpected, unwanted, but real. The tension rests gently. Maybe life's greatest cracks are where true light enters, and maybe pain, in its rawest form, is what makes us cry out beyond ourselves, toward the one who hears. Because strangely, when we are broken, we also seem most open to whatever or whomever we sense might be out there. In our lowest moments, pride fades and we long for direction, for help, for signs. Some call it the universe, others call it God. But in the ache of pain, the instinct to cry out to something is almost universal. The irony of human rights without human worth. If we are merely cosmic accidents, on what basis do we claim universal human rights? Human rights are widely regarded as the backbone of modern society. Freedom, dignity, equality. We believe every person deserves these, simply by virtue of being human. Yet their philosophical foundations are rarely examined in secular frameworks. If humanity is nothing but a random byproduct of blind processes, why claim rights at all? Philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre famously critiqued universal human rights, arguing that they emerge from a Judeo-Christian or Enlightenment heritage and lack grounding in purely secular reasoning. Similarly, critics note that notions like rights require a view of humans as having inherent worth, not just social constructs or evolutionary accidents. Consider the paradox. We reflexively affirm that people ought never be enslaved or tortured, that justice must apply fairly. But in a materialist worldview, on what basis is this more than emotional preference? If humanity is no more special than any other species, why elevate human life above convenience or utility? Without a transcendent source of value, we have no firm ground to resist the slippage into utilitarian or authoritarian regimes. In a gentle late-night reflection, one might whisper, why do I feel that rights matter so deeply, more than survival or efficiency? This inner conviction of worth isn't easily explained by evolutionary benefit. It suggests a whisper of transcendent value baked into our souls. Even without asserting God outright, the fact that human worth feels objective nudges us to wonder if something, or someone beyond matter, is the true source of that worth. The meaning crisis paradox. Why is modern life so materially advanced, yet spiritually starved? We live in an unprecedented era of abundance, technology, comfort, access. Yet surveys reveal growing loneliness, anxiety, depression. Western societies, despite peak prosperity, face what some call a meaning crisis. Historian Kengo Iwata observes that consumer culture leads to dilution of meaning, leaving emotional emptiness behind material wealth. Psychological trends echo this. The rise of the existential vacuum, where basic needs are met, but spiritual longing remains unfulfilled. This paradox is stark. The more we gain, the more fragmented we feel. Even spiritual seekers abandon meaning claims, yet turn to mindfulness, community, or social media in hopes of connection. We chase comfort, rejecting ancient values, only to discover deeper emptiness. In the hush of the night, you might reflect. Your material world is secure, yet you still long. Long for depth, long for belonging. That internal ache suggests something the tangible world cannot satisfy. It hints at the idea that humans are not solely economic units, but spiritual beings, with souls that crave more than matter. This is the meaning crisis paradox. Modern progress liberates us in body, but starves us in spirit. Quietly, this tension invites us to ask if our souls are pointing beyond ourselves, toward purpose, beauty, love, perhaps toward the divine. The paradox of dignity without design. How can we claim inherent human worth if we are accidental arrangements of atoms? Imagine the profound reality that nearly every culture emphasizes a kernel of human value, our worth, our dignity, our right to respect. Across continents and centuries, we feel this deep sense. There is something sacred in each person. But how can this be true if at the basic level, we are just evolved matter, chemistry shaped by mutation and time? Secular ethics and international declarations often speak of inherent dignity, a value we hold simply for being human. Philosopher Kant famously declared that humans have dignity because we can reason, deliberate, and act morally, worth that admits of no price. But if these capacities arose by accident, through random genetic drift and survival pressures, why should they carry moral weight rather than being arbitrary quirks of evolution? Some secular thinkers avoid the problem by saying dignity is socially constructed, a value we grant each other in relationships. But if that's the case, dignity becomes fragile, dependent on culture and consensus. How can we then speak of universal human rights or moral wrongs when all is contingent on shifting agreements? Even evolutionary psychologists admit this tension. Traits useful for survival, like empathy or cooperation, were selected by evolution. But when we feel deep respect for a stranger's life, it often seems to transcend mere strategy. When we reject cruelty to an enemy, we cite principles rather than convenience. Scientific accounts explain human traits in terms of function, but dignity feels qualitative, transcendent. Researchers note a gap between tooth and claw survival and the noblesse of courage, truth, creativity, compassion. Why invest moral gravity in things that may just help your genes? Consider this. If we are just cosmic accidents, then the basis for valuing any life is arbitrary. There is no ought, only is. Yet our hearts insist that something is worth protecting. This conviction echoes across cultures. The Stoics spoke of children of the universe, and the Maori believe in mana, a deep spiritual worth woven into every life. Such values reveal a universal human recognition of inherent dignity. On a human level, this manifests in moments such as refusing to harm a newborn or crying at a hero's act, regardless of utility. These responses appear to be pointing beyond biology. Some thinkers suggest that our dignity is meaningful only because it reflects a deeper source, a transcendent ground that gives it authority. In calm reflection, consider this tenderness we hold for every person, so natural yet so inexplicable in a strictly material world. If dignity truly exists, might it signal something more than chemistry? Might this moral weight be a faint echo of design? Each time we whisper a prayer for justice, each time we shelter the displaced or forgive a hurt, it's as if we're echoing a truth not written in atoms, but breathed into our souls by a creator. The irony of skepticism. To question everything assumes a stable platform from which to ask. So where does that platform come from? In quiet reflection, consider this. If we scrutinize every belief, every assumption, every sense, every memory, who is doing the questioning? Skepticism demands a firm ground from which to question. But if all ground is suspect, then the act of questioning itself unravels. This is the irony. Radical doubt needs something stable to doubt from. Epistemologists call this the foundationalism problem. Theories like Descartes' cogito ergo sum suggest we need at least one secure starting point, something undeniably true, to build knowledge on. Without a first bedrock belief, whether it's the certainty of our own consciousness or the reliability of reason, any attempt to doubt becomes circular or leads to infinite regress. Consider this usual path. I doubt my senses, but I still use senses to doubt. I doubt my reasoning, yet still reason to doubt. Each challenge assumes that reasoning itself works. In effect, skepticism eats the table on which it stands. This contradiction helps us understand a curious truth. Skepticism relies on reason to challenge reason. Historically, thinkers like Pyrrhonian skeptics practiced suspension of judgment to find peace. But they also implicitly trusted that suspension itself was meaningful. Contemporary philosophers still argue, if we doubt everything, we end up doubting our doubt. To even ask, is anything sure, presumes something is. In a godless worldview, one might claim all beliefs are provisional. Yet life demands convictions about ethics, science, purpose. How do we live if even our convictions are dubious? We still act. We still build families, build careers, build trust. We employ reasoning, communicate, create. We live as though some things are reliable. So where might the stable ground lie? Some suggest intuition, logic, or experience as basic beliefs. Others propose that self-awareness, I think, therefore I am, serves as an anchor. But even those foundations raise questions. Why should self-awareness be more than a useful but arbitrary feature of a biological organism? In moments of stillness, this paradox rests like a pebble. Skepticism is powerful, yet paradoxically depends on belief in something stable, namely reason itself. We question truth, but we trust that questioning carries meaning. That gap between demanding perfect certainty and relying on imperfect thought is subtle yet persistent. As you reflect, consider this paradox softly. To challenge all claims, we need at least one claim worthy of trust. Could our ability to reason, on which the entire process depends, point to something deeper than atoms? Could this trust in thought be a hint toward a reliable mind behind reality? In this restful inquiry, no answer is demanded, but the tension invites gentle wonder. It seems our trust in reason is not mere accident, but the echo of a reason beyond ourselves. The paradox of longing for wholeness. Why does humanity keep crafting utopias if we are merely evolutionary survivors? From the earliest mythologies to modern sci-fi, humanity has always dreamed of a better world, a place where peace is uninterrupted, justice is universal, and suffering is no more. Across centuries and cultures, people have envisioned utopias, Edenic gardens, golden ages, perfect societies, technological paradises. But where does this longing come from? If our species is merely the product of natural selection, driven by the need to survive and reproduce, why do we desire perfection, not just survival? Why does the heart quietly ache for a world without brokenness? Why do we write poems about harmony, build cathedrals, imagine peace, and paint futures where nothing is missing? Materialist evolution suggests we should desire only what helps us persist: food, shelter, dominance, mates. But the human mind transcends that. It weeps at injustice far away, cries over art, and sacrifices for strangers. And at the center of this human spirit lies a strange tension. We know the world is not whole, but act as if it should be. The paradox of longing for wholeness is this: if reality is indifferent and chaotic, why do we act like it's broken and in need of fixing? Why would mere atoms, arranged through blind process, produce creatures that mourn for something better than what exists? We don't just survive, we grieve what's missing. We imagine completeness. Psychologists and theologians alike note this pattern. Carl Jung spoke of an inner yearning toward integration, toward healing the fragmented self. Viktor Frankl observed that even in the bleakest conditions, people still clung to meaning. The Hebrew prophets described a shalom, a peace that's not just calm, but complete. Even secular literature imagines the good place again and again. Something in us whispers, this isn't how it's meant to be. In a godless framework, these dreams are often reduced to wishful illusions, byproducts of our social imagination. But that explanation, while tidy, leaves an ache. Because if dreams of wholeness are illusions, why do they feel more real than reality? Why do they haunt us so gently and persistently? Some might say, the longing itself is a signpost. We don't hunger for food unless food exists. Could it be that our longing for wholeness points to something beyond this fractured world? Not because we're deluded, but because we remember, faintly, a place or presence where wholeness was real. This idea echoes through ancient writings, including one passage that says, God has set eternity in the human heart. Whether one accepts that or not, the sentiment rings familiar. We yearn for something timeless, something full. Not just survival, not just progress, but peace that stays. As you lie in silence, think of all the ways this longing shows up, in lullabies, in hopes for future generations, in our frustration when life feels unfair. These aren't evolutionary errors. They're glimpses of something. It seems we long for wholeness, because we were meant for it. With that being true, the world's brokenness doesn't have the final word. Longing itself becomes a quiet paradox, one that draws us closer to truth, to the one who planted the longing there. Segment 5. Reflective Closing Thoughts. The Echo Paradox. If there is no God, why did nearly every ancient civilization imagine one? In every culture, Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, China, the Americas, ancient people believed in gods, spirits, or something beyond the visible world. They built temples, created rituals, and told stories of divine beings shaping their lives. This universal echo of the divine raises a curious question. Why would independent societies so reliably invent gods? Some argue these beliefs arose from fear, ignorance, or a human need for explanation. But the pattern is remarkably consistent. People across time and space, to comfort, explain the flood, predict seasons, or give moral shape, created divinities. Even where gods had different forms, every culture placed them at the center of their moral, cosmic, and aesthetic imaginations. This is the Echo Paradox, the global resonance of divinity, even among those who have never met, suggests something deeper than mere invention. Why would early humans, isolated from each other, reach similar conclusions? Psychologists point to phenomena like the oceanic feeling, a sense of oneness or eternity observed across cultures. Freudian theory suggests religion began in the infantile longing for a protective father, reflecting a universal emotional structure. Cognitive scientists see it as an evolutionary byproduct of agency detection. Our brains spontaneously infer intent behind natural events, which kept us safe from hidden threats. Yet consider, all these instincts, emotion, survival-based reasoning, memory of awe, are internal. They don't necessitate external divine reality. Still, the cultural echo persists. Civilizations with no contact invented temples. Even when myths arose, they described a moral world and cosmic purpose. In the calm hush before sleep, one might gently ask, why are these stories so widespread? Why do humans, even secular ones, naturally revert to these stories, acknowledge something beyond, feel small yet connected? This echo isn't direct proof, but a whisper in the dark. Maybe our souls are tuning into something universal, something outside human invention. The paradox does not shout. It simply lingers in the night. Civilizations rise and fall, languages fade, but near universal yearning for the divine remains. The sleep paradox. Why does the mind instinctively seek rest in something larger than itself? Sleep is more than biological reset. Across cultures, humans seek comfort in bedtime rituals, stories, prayers, mantras, framing rest as sacred or protective. Even otherwise secular people talk of letting go, trusting something bigger, or consecrate sleep as recovery, not mere downtime. Here's another layer. Research into rest emphasizes that meaningful pause, emptiness, or mental unburdening, moments that feel bigger, help us recharge emotionally and cognitively. It's not only physical fatigue, but mental and existential fatigue that we escape with rest. Yet why would an accident-driven mind yearn for connection beyond itself, even in rest? In consumer societies, we obsessively distract but secretly crave stillness. Religious or spiritual people, and many atheists, reach toward rituals or meditations that dissolve personal boundaries, evoking unity with something larger, a cosmic night sky, the shared breath of humanity, the timeless space of rest. Freud called this the oceanic feeling, a momentary flooding sense of unity with all things. It's not confined to religious settings. It surfaces when listening to music, gazing at stars, or simply lying still. We feel small, yes, but supported by vastness. That is the sleep paradox. In seeking rest, we instinctively touch something beyond our skin. We yearn for refuge in depth or context we don't fully understand. In the calm threshold of slumber, you might quietly sense your mind slowly letting go of small struggles, drifting into a space that feels larger than your body. That instinct is real and potentially meaningful. It hints that maybe we are made for more than utility. There is place in the cosmos that welcomes our souls to rest. The silence paradox. Why does silence often feel full, pregnant with presence, if there's no one behind it? Silence isn't empty. It often feels like a hidden sanctuary, a space brimming with something deeper, almost sacred. Philosophers like Nietzsche and Simone Weil explored this, suggesting that silence isn't just absence, it's a presence that resonates with meaning. Nietzsche said, "The most silent hour has the greatest sound," and Weil described silence as the only language that God speaks. In our restless world, silence offers a profound invitation. It lowers the volume of our minds, creating a space where something beyond ourselves might gently be felt. Phenomenologically, through our lived experience, silence often draws our attention inward. Merleau-Ponty and others have observed that the absence of external distractions forces us to be attentive, to notice what lies beneath words and noise. Silence becomes a kind of mirror, reflecting hidden fears, hopes, or longings. Over time, it may feel as though the silence itself is moving, breathing, alive. Eastern and Western spiritual traditions alike celebrate silence as a doorway to inner understanding. Heidegger, Sartre, and others suggested silence isn't escape, it's confrontation with our truest selves. As we listen to silence, we begin to hear something unspoken, the echo of our own questions, our sense of smallness, our awareness of awe. Notice the paradox. We expect emptiness in silence, but encounter fullness. In silence, we often feel larger than ourselves, our thoughts settle, and we feel held in a vast open space. This openness cultivates humility. In its quiet, we sense something greater, an unseen presence, the possibility that reality is far more than material noise. Why does this matter as we drift towards sleep? Because if there is no designer, no transcendent voice beyond our own, why would silence be so charged? Why wouldn't it simply feel like absence? Yet it often feels comforting, as if creation itself is pausing alongside us. In the Bible, the book of Ecclesiastes observes that creation tells us of a creator. In silence, we feel that testimony, a quiet testimony of purpose, of presence, of someone who hears when we don't speak. This paradox invites reflection, not argument. It doesn't demand belief, but it gently points to the reality that silence itself may be the canvas of something greater. If silence can feel so full, it seems that the fullness is a whisper of the one who created all. The return home paradox. Why does the idea of returning to a spiritual home move even non-believers? In a culture that increasingly rejects religion, many still describe a sudden longing for home, not a house, not a childhood bedroom, but something deeper, a spiritual home. Psychologist Kai Spiekermann explores this in the concept of Sehnsucht, a bittersweet, profound yearning for an idealized completeness, for something just out of reach yet unmistakably real. Even those who reject organized faith sometimes speak of homesickness, for a place they've never physically lived, and that feeling transcends explanation. Author Brené Brown describes it as spiritual homesickness, an emotional tug towards something sacred, an inner place of rest and belonging even amid doubt. She speaks of returning to a home that exists only inside me, a longing that isn't about nostalgia or memory, but about a deeper belonging that earthly places fail to satisfy. Sociologists studying secular spirituality have found that many people seek rituals, nature walks, or moments of stillness not as religious acts, but as a way to connect with something larger than themselves. Even secular rituals, like lighting a candle, pausing in nature, or practicing meditation, serve to anchor us in something transcendent. They bridge the gap between the material and something ineffable. Psychologist Radula Weininger notes that people who identify as secular still talk about sacred experiences, or connection, transcendence. Why does this matter in a conversation about the possibility of God? Because even without theology, people are wired to seek a sense of home, a place or experience that makes them feel rooted in something timeless. Simone Weil described the human need for roots, a connection to place, purpose, community. That modern uprootedness often disrupts. That sense of being uprooted fuels the quest for belonging, for meaning, for a home beyond geography. There's a verse in the Bible, Romans 1:20, which expresses a comparable idea, that creation itself reveals the invisible attributes of God. Just as nature reveals a creator, so does the longing for home point to something real beyond the material. The home in our soul may hint at the home we were created for. Even brain science supports the idea that humans crave coherence and connection. Viktor Frankl observed in Man's Search for Meaning that those who survived brutal suffering were those who held on to a sense of meaning, an internal home to return to. Without that inner anchor, hope fades, even amid comfort. In the quiet hours before sleep, when distractions fade, this paradox emerges. Why does my heart ache for home, even when there's no physical place calling? Why does imagining a spiritual home bring peace to my soul? To agree with the notion of God, existence invites the suggestion that longing is part of how He wired us, to feel homesick on earth, so we would seek and one day return to our true home. It might not demand belief, but it's a gentle signpost, pointing towards something real that names itself home. The final question, paradox. Why does the question, "What is all this for?" still echo through every culture? From the dawn of human awareness, people everywhere have asked, "Why are we here? What is the purpose of my life?" It's more than curiosity. It's a deep, insistent echo that spans continents, centuries, and philosophies. Even in radically atheist and secular contexts, this question never truly disappears. It remains quietly persistent, like a pulse beneath our surface. Philosopher Albert Camus wrote of humanity's awareness of the absurd, the deep tension between our longing for meaning and the silence of the cosmos. His message was not to despair, but to embrace the struggle. The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart. The question why pulses beneath that struggle, refusing to be silenced by science or comfort alone. Psychologist Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, saw this in his practice of logotherapy. He believed that the primary force within humans is the will to find meaning, logos, and that suffering, even in its worst forms, can be transformed through purpose. His work revealed that people who believed their lives had meaning, even amid unspeakable pain, were more likely to survive. Why? Because meaning shades suffering with purpose, transcending mere biology. In modern times, the question remains central. Sociologists describe an existential vacuum, a sense of inner emptiness, even when material needs are met. People may achieve success, travel the world, master skills, and still feel the echo. Why? What is this for? Our accomplishments feel hollow without meaning behind them, because meaning isn't just a nice bonus. It looks built into our nature. Across the globe, from ancient myths to modern essays, this echo recurs. Aristotle believed humans are rational creatures whose highest function is thinking well, aiming for eudaimonia, flourishing through virtue. Existentialists like Sartre and Kierkegaard explored different angles: the burden of freedom, the angst of meaning-making, the responsibility to define oneself. Even secular thinkers admit the echo is unavoidable. So what does it point to? If the entire cosmos is mere random atoms, cold and silent, why would humans everywhere yearn for significance? Why would we invest our days, our love, our tears in a story that may not have one? It seems more than a psychological impulse. It feels like a clue. Many listeners, especially those without faith, may recognize this question as natural, even necessary, whether or not they accept spiritual answers. In listening to their own inner voice asking, "What is all this for?" they touch something fundamental. Turning towards a biblical perspective, the very presence of that question hints at something greater. It points to a final answer, whether named or unnamed, that gives coherence to everything. As John 8:12 says, Jesus claims to be the light of the world, suggesting that the hunger for meaning may be satisfied in his presence. This question remains urgent because it reveals that life is more than biological chance. It's a meaningful quest, and in that soft pursuit, there is purpose. Feel the resonance of that echo. It is not eerie, it's intimate and essential. It is the soul's quiet invitation. Not everything remains unanswered. Maybe tomorrow, maybe a lifetime from now, the answer will find you. Or perhaps the echo matters as much as the answer. We have journeyed through many deep paradoxes, the unanswered question of first causes, the strange workings of our mind, the universal hunger for meaning, and even the way we reason. In calm conclusion, we see a common thread. When we remove the foundation of God or transcendence, each of these everyday realities, causation, consciousness, morality, reason, meaning, becomes puzzling. None of these points singly proves anything. Each simply lingers as a thoughtful puzzle in the quiet mind. Together, they form a constellation of wonder in the night sky of thought. If there is indeed no God, then why do these things trouble us? Why do we feel there should be a first cause, yet none can be found for some? Why do we sense that our minds may not be fully accounted for by neurons? Why does our soul ache for justice, beauty, connection, and beyond? The goal isn't neutrality, it's clarity. A worldview without God may seem coherent until it is tested by the questions it cannot answer. And if it cannot answer them, can it be true? We gently encourage reflection. Perhaps the soul's longing, the mind's curiosity, and the universe's patterns are all inviting us to look more deeply. In the silence before sleep, one might whisper to oneself, could all of these quiet questions be signposts pointing somewhere? If this series of thoughts has stirred something in you, a question, a wonder, a soft doubt, that is the gentle invitation of this reflection. You do not need to rush to any conclusion. In fact, embrace the calm uncertainty. Let these paradoxes sit with you like stars in the night, distant yet shining, each asking softly to be gazed upon. Maybe tomorrow they will seem different. Maybe they will fade. Maybe they will grow into a quiet conviction. For now, they are here as companions on your journey inward. Rest easy, knowing that the greatest thinkers, sages, scientists, poets, and prophets have also gazed at these mysteries. Many have felt the same wonder and ache, and many found in that stillness the first whisper of something greater than themselves. So while you drift towards sleep, permit yourself the comfort of exploration. If you believe there is a God, perhaps that is a voice calling you home. If you don't, perhaps this very longing, this very curiosity, is the quiet invitation to begin listening. If you're awake, close your eyes, breathe slowly. Let these questions settle like whispers, not storms. Tomorrow may bring answers, or more mystery still. But tonight, rest in the quiet wonder that you are here, thinking, feeling, seeking. Perhaps that too is no accident. Sleep well,